this is the full Sunekos theory training. My name's Abs, or Dr. Abs, whichever you prefer. I'm going to do this completely off the top of my head. Nothing is scripted, the same as I would if I was teaching people in person or if I was speaking at an event. I never have a script, nothing is prepared, everything's straight off the top of my head. That being said, if it's your first time, I'm going to pause at certain points and ask you questions like as if you're sat in front of me to try and test your own knowledge. If you're watching this for the second or third time, you can still pause it at the same points and see if you remember what the answer is from before. Other than that, we'll get straight into it. I'm going to start off by simply drawing 5 circles here. They represent the 5 layers of the epidermis, and then we've got the dermoepidermal junction here, and then underneath that we're going to have the dermis as well. Now, what are these 5 layers? Pause it, see if you can answer them yourself. If not, I'll just tell you what they are. So we have the stratum basal, the stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and the stratum corneum, which is the outermost layer, the thing that's in contact with the outside world. And then we have underneath that the DEJ as well, and then we'll get into that as well. But the question I'm going to ask now is, what is the difference between the basal lamina and the basement membrane? You might have heard both of those, and some people use those terms interchangeably. Anatomically, that's completely incorrect. Pause it, see if you can answer the question. If not, here it is. So there are 3 layers in the basement membrane, which is this entire thing, okay? Basement membrane, all there. Now, these 3 layers, 1, 2, 3. The first 2 make up the basal lamina, okay? So asking what's the difference between the basal lamina and the basement membrane is a bit like asking what's the difference between, say, the midfield and the attack versus the football team. The midfield and the attack are a portion of the team, along with the defense and the goalkeeper. Together they make the football team. The basal lamina is layer 1 and layer 2. Together with layer 3, it makes the basement membrane. Now the top layer, where are we? There we go. I've got 2 screens here, so I'm going to have to flip back and forth in case there's an error message or something like I've just gotten now. Where is that gone? Cool. Okay. So the top layer, we have the lamina lucida, and then we have the lamina densa, and then the lamina reticularis, okay? They're heavily dependent on certain things. So lamina lucida, for instance, is heavily dependent on laminin, specific protein. Lamina densa, specifically on collagen type 4, COL4. And the lamina reticularis is heavily dependent on fibronectin, okay? Now, when you have all these cell types working together, how do these cells know what to do as a baseline physiology? I don't mean in terms of, let's say there's trauma to the skin, right? A wound or something. They're going to react to that, okay? I don't mean in terms of a reaction. In terms of baseline physiological rates, let's say the baseline rate of keratinocyte differentiation at the level of the stratum basal. Does it differentiate this many times in a given time period, or this many times? What actually controls that? What's responsible for that? Well, if I draw, and pause it if you want to have a go at answering, if I draw a cell here, okay, let's get a different color, let's go for that one. Let's say this is the DNA in the nucleus, okay, all tangled up, all the DNA, there we go. Everything inside the cell is called the intracellular matrix, and everything outside the cell is called the extracellular matrix. To answer that question of how does a cell know what its baseline rate of this or rate of that is, I'm going to go through an analogy for a second. Let's say you have a business, right? Your business is a particular, and it's housed in one particular building, in one particular office block. And your business is making trainers, okay? You're making shoes. You need to know, how many trainers do you make? What type of trainers do you make? Where do you sell them? How do you sell them? How do you reach people? What's the ground like? What kind of trainers will people need, etc., etc. So what you do as a business is market research. You do surveys, you employ research companies, you use the internet, blah, 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 blah. Everything that's going on outside of the building is a demand being met by the supply you're producing. So questions of your supply is based on your analysis of the demand. And the cell is doing exactly that. The cell is this business that's making trainers, and the customers that it's serving is everything outside the cell, okay? Everything outside the office block. And so its market survey, its analytical research, etc., is carried out, okay? But it's a physical process here, and I'm going to draw that for you. Let's use some different colors to make it easy. Red, let's go with red here. There's one. Let's go with an orange. Let's go with green. And then let's use, let's say, a light blue. Okay, I'm going to label all of these. Move that mouse out of the way. Just draw the links on these. So here we have CD44. Here we have Live 1. Whoops. RAM. TLR4, okay. These receptors that are on the edge of the cell, on the outside of the cell, they're the only thing that allows the cell to figure out what's going on outside of its walls, okay? A prison is only going to know what's going on outside the prison through certain things, like the TV and word of mouth and maybe some letters they receive, right? So think of the cell as a prison. The prisoners inside only know what to do based on what the receptors are telling them. The receptors here are the TV, the news, the letters, the visitors coming to see them. And so the important ones here are, whoops, let's try that again, CD44 and RAM, there's two M's there, sorry. For the purposes of this discussion today, they're the important ones. So CD44 stands for cluster of differentiation 44, and RAM stands for receptor for hyaluronic acid mediated motility. Then we have Live, which is the lymphatic vessel endothelial HA receptor, and TLR4 toll-like receptor. CD44 interacts with, let's draw this here, HA. Okay, but CD44 is really interesting because it's also related to things like tumor metastasis, okay? What conclusion can you draw from that? And think about this. Pause if you want to and have a think. It interacts with HA, and it's implicated heavily in things like tumor metastasis. Clearly, the conclusion you can draw is that HA can play a role in tumor metastasis. What you think, well, I thought hyaluronic acid was really good for us. I thought it hydrates, blah, blah, blah. That's what fillers are made of. Yeah, it does. But that immediately should tell you that it's not that simple if it can also do things like this. And there's a lot that can be said of generalizations. So HA, people say, oh, it hydrates, but actually we know that it's implicated in even things like cancer metastasis and even collagen. People say, oh, this product makes collagen. It's a nonsense statement. Saying we use HA or we use collagen, that is as vague as someone asking you, what car do you drive? I've got one with wheels. How does that help? Is it a van? Is it a Formula 1 car? Is it a lorry? Is it a hatchback? Doesn't mean anything. And so HA, now that we realize it's implicated in things like this, how do we figure out what property it has? Well, we figure it out using things like this. So we might have high molecular weight, let's say medium molecular weight, and low molecular weight, okay? High molecular weight, shall we say, is the good stuff, okay? So that can be anti-inflammatory. It can protect cells like fibroblasts. It can mop up free radicals as an antioxidant, all these properties. If we go to low weight HA is pro-inflammatory, okay? Low weight HA has even been implicated in things like, as I said before, cancer metastasis. There are good papers on this. You can read papers like, which ones should we go for? Wu, 2015, Do, if I'm saying it right, Do 2016, and then Eberlein 2008, which I think is German. Eberlein 2008, wenn Sie sprechen auf Deutsch. So those are important papers that show you that. And RAM is another receptor that interacts with HA, but RAM's quite an interesting one actually. It starts off inside the cell and then it gets pushed outside the cell. So there's a lot of variation in HA. It can cause all sorts of effects, and that's why when a company is trying to sell you something and it has HA in it, the first question you need to ask is, what's the weight? Okay, because we've just said that the weight that we like produces things like an anti-inflammatory effect. The low weight does literally the exact opposite. It's pro-inflammatory. So what good is it, or what use is it being vague and saying we have HA in our product, or our product that we want to sell you has HA in it? It's too vague. So you have to define it, and that's why a lot of more modern skin boosting products specifically state the weight that's in it. And even Sunekos, we state the weight very, very clearly, and we say exactly why we have that weight, how much of it, etc., etc. And that's the same for collagen as well. So how many types of collagen are there? Pause and have a think if you want to. Otherwise, I'll tell you the answer is 28. And we've just discussed how vague it is to say our product has HA. It's even more vague to say our product produces collagen, because some are completely useless in the context that we are looking at a product like this, i.e. an anti-aging context. So collagen, if we say that as C-O-L, let's start with collagen type 1, okay? So collagen type 1 is probably about sort of 90% of the body's collagen. It's involved in things like skin structure, scarring as well. And I'm going to draw it in this diagram here for you. So let's use a different color. Let's go with that blue there. So collagen type 1 would sit here. And it provides things like tensile strength inside the dermis, and you have type 3 collagen there as well. So let's go back to the black color. There we go. So type 2. I'm not going to go through every single one, by the way. I'm going to go through enough so that you realize how obvious it should be for companies to say which type of collagen it induces. Otherwise, it's useless. So collagen type 2, that's mainly found in the cartilage. Collagen type 3, that's mainly actually found in organs inside the body, sort of, hollow organs, things like that. There is some, in the dermis, like I've just drawn. Collagen type 4, as we've shown here, it's a crucial part in the dermo-epidermal junction, okay? And we've got collagen type 5 as well. By the way, collagen type 4 anchors can be described as anchoring the basement membrane to the layers around it. Collagen type 5, that is sometimes found in small amounts in the DEJ, and it's possibly used to produce other types of collagen as well. Let's delete that. Other types of collagen. Collagen type 6, that's an interesting one. It's really only found in the muscle ECM. As you can tell, my handwriting is terrible. Collagen type 7, that is found around the DEJ as well, and that anchors skin to connective tissue. Okay, so you can, and that goes all the way on until type 28, which I'm clearly not going to go through because I can't be bothered, frankly. But you see how varied their jobs are. Now, the important ones, let's just get a different color, are 4 and 7, okay? And I'm going to show you exactly why, and that's important in the context of anti-aging, by the way. If we go up a second and we look at this diagram here for the dermoepidermal junction, we see collagen type 4 is there, and we see that we've also got something like fibronectin. Now, fibronectin, I'm just going to make some notes about it here. It's highly involved in things like cell replication, motility, or in other words, movements, stem cell differentiation, heavily in wound healing as well. And it can even attach itself to the outside of cells and anchor them into the extracellular matrix as well. Now, if you look at all those things that it's being used for, the replication, the movement, the differentiation, no wonder it's used heavily in wound healing. Wound healing and anti-aging are actually very, very similar in terms of some of the processes and the principles behind the processes that they're using, because in a wound, what are you trying to do? You're trying to generate new stuff to replace stuff that isn't wanted anymore. And in anti-aging, what are you trying to do? You're trying to generate new cells so that you can be younger, and generating new cells can increase the skin thickness, etc., and reverse some of the effects of aging. And for fibronectin is actually sold, I believe there's a commercialized version called Fibrega, and you can buy this and literally just apply it directly to wounds, which shows how important it is. So when you're talking about anti-aging context and you're talking about cell function and a number of cells and density of cells and things like this, how can you have optimum or maximum anti-aging results without such crucial anti-aging proteins such as fibronectin? And Sunekos maximally produces fibronectin relative to other products, every other product in the world, as well as things like elastin as well. I'll put that in brackets for Fibrega. So if we're going to write about elastin, let's do it over here. So let's go elastin. Elastin is made using the ELN gene, okay? Now, if I start off by saying, what is the difference between collagen and elastin? Everyone talks about it. This product makes collagen, elastin, great. What's actually the difference, though? Pause and see if you can answer that question. If you can't, it's really important, because if you have no elastin but loads of collagen, actually you're still going to look pretty aged for a reason. Collagen provides the structure to the skin. Think of it as scaffolding. It can make things plump out, etc. And when you make a facial expression using your facial muscles, which are all connected to the SMAS, the connective tissue that keeps everything moving as one in the face, things can bunch up nicely. But then when your muscles relax, things have to recoil back. And elastin is that recoiling molecule. It allows things to spring back to exactly where they were before you made the facial expression. And that's super important if you think about it. If you have patients that are very aged or young but aging in the face, one of the tests you can do is a snap test, where you literally just pull a bit of skin under their eye and you test how long it takes to spring back. Or sometimes if it doesn't spring back, there's a bit of it that's just supported by itself. And that's not necessarily just a lack of collagen. You can induce collagen back into that area and it's going to be a little bit plumper, fine, yeah, great. But it doesn't necessarily cause the skin to recoil back like an elastic band. That's elastin doing that, okay? So they have to work together. And again, elastin is one of the products which Sunekos is able to maximally produce in a physiological way. But what does physiological way mean? Well, if we draw a chart, for instance, let's say we have something like this, along like that, and let's say we have some sunshine here. And the sun can actually induce elastin production. So if I draw it with an orange line, upon the irradiation with the sun, there's a big spike, and then it goes back down again, okay? And you're not that much better off, frankly. Whereas if you have too much of the elastin, then you might produce something like elastosis. And in this case, where can I write it? Let's do it there. Elastosis. In this case, it's, I'm gonna sneeze. Outtakes. In this case, it's solar elastosis, because clearly it's the sun that's resulted in that. But what's the difference between UV exposure inducing elastosis or elastin production, or elastin gene transcription, shall we say, and Sunekos? Well, if you have Sunekos, what happens is this. It's a gradual increase without a spike and then going back down to zero. And that's the physiological change. So it's not a reaction, it's a baseline rate of work increase. It's a baseline, a background physiological rate increase. And that's what in a physiological way means. So if you're generating a load of collagen in the face, okay, it could be because someone's punched you and you've got a big wound and you're generating collagen. That doesn't mean you're going to carry on producing loads of collagen, because that's not your baseline physiological rate. When you're not doing anything, you're not being punched, how much collagen are you producing then? That's the important one. And that's what Sunekos can improve massively, okay? So if I just label this, and that's Sunekos, okay? Physiological increase. And so when we say it can maximally produce collagen type 4, type 7, elastin and fibronectin in a physiological way, this is what it is. Other products may cause a spike. You may have some mesotherapy products where you inject the ingredients into the skin and you see a change, but then that's it, And I used to do mesotherapy a long time ago. I always thought to myself, is it not better for the patient to just do skincare? Because you can give them the same ingredients in skincare, but they're putting it in every day. Yes, it's not going all in because it's not injected, but they can do that every day. So long term, they're probably getting more in that way than having it injected a couple times a year. Because even if you put the injections, of mesotherapy into the skin, let's say you give them certain ingredients, yeah, the cells might use them and you get this change. But then they're going to go back to the way they were because you've not created a physiological change. You've created a short-term appetite for ingredients that you've placed in the environment around the cell. Whereas Sunekos is not that. In fact, after a while, the ingredients in Sunekos aren't even in the skin. They're completely gone. And yet the improvements still keep on going. And that's what I'm more interested in. And that's what you should be more interested in, because what you're going to do with the patient with mesotherapy for a long-term result, bring them back every week so you can inject vitamin C into their skin. It's just unfeasible. It's not worth it. So if you can get the body to look after itself by raising its baseline physiology and improving it massively like this, everyone is going to be better off. You're going to be better off, and the patient's going to be better off as well, because you can get better results. The patient doesn't have to keep coming in constantly. Now, elastin itself is made up, let me get the black pen back, of three main amino acids. So one is glycine, the other is proline, and the last one is lysine. Okay, and you may think it has too much detail, I don't need to know the amino acids. Actually you do, and by the end of this video, any product that you look at from now on, you're going to want to know which amino acids are in there, because there's very, very strong reasons to understand that, and we'll go into that in a second. So let me just get rid of this error message that I've got on this other screen here. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So when we're talking about changes going on in the skin, okay, we can look at these, bits of our anatomy. We can look at these types of collagen and everything. But what's important from a patient perspective is not, oh, my keratinocytes aren't functioning properly. It's my face is sagging, right? And things are getting loose. And when you say that, It's obvious, I'm sure we all know that, even non-medically qualified people will know that. But we have to be more technical than that in order to prevent, not treating the patient correctly, being missold things from companies and sales reps which you just don't need or aren't very good at all. And when you say that things are getting looser and things, people always say, oh, well, you've got less collagen, as an example. Yes, you've got less collagen, but we've just said there's so many different types. Some are phenomenal for anti-aging, some are completely useless because they're used in a different part of the body. So when we're talking about these aging-related changes that everyone knows of, like the sagging and the looseness, blah, 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 one of the key things that we lose is collagen type 4 and type 7. You can have the type 1 and 3, and I'll just label where they are here. So there, you've got collagen 1, collagen 3, but it's collagen 4 here, and collagen 7, which is, I'll just draw it in, where should I draw it in black? I'll draw it here. Let's get a different color for collagen 7. Let's draw it as green. It's coming down here under the basement membrane, and it's looping into the collagen bundles underneath in the reticular layer. So it's picking them up like a hook almost to keep everything glued together. That's why you don't get this slippage between the layers when you maximize the collagen type 4 and type 7. If you induce 1 and 3 into that dermis, great, the dermis is a little bit more plump now, but it doesn't necessarily stop that slippage between the layers. And if you don't stop the slippage, you're not going to keep everything nice and tight. So for instance, we just spoke about that snap test here. You need the elastin to recoil it back, but at the same time, if the layers aren't held together very well and you pull one of them apart from the other, then it can just support itself, and hence why it doesn't snap back. But if they're glued so tightly together you cannot separate them, that itself is going to create some elastic potential energy to help that snapback come back. So 4 and 7 are exceptionally important, and they are responsible for everything staying tight. And so you can extrapolate from that statement and say that when we age, arguably the most important ones to reverse the visual aging related changes is 4 and 7. If you have 1 and 3, great, it's not going to harm you obviously, but it's not going to keep everything nice and tight. So tightness, which is what everyone wants when they get older, is 4 and 7, and that's an anatomical fact. 1 and 3 are not useful in the dermo-epidermal junction to keep the layers together like 4 and 7 are. You can see the functions are so different, and you can see they're physically in a different place in the skin, so they can't possibly be responsible for exactly the same thing. And when you see the structure of 4 and 7, you're going to understand that even better. And when you see it physically, the difference in different types of collagen becomes massively abundant because they don't even look like the same molecules. They don't look related at all. And when you see that structure, you immediately understand how important it is to have them the way they are as well. In fact, that's exactly what we're going to do now. And that snap test, by the way, that I was on about, is a really good paper for Solar 2022. I'll talk about it soon. And that's the paper which showed massive increases in snap test results using Sunekos. Huge results, in fact. But I'm going to show you now. Let's go here. Oops, let's go to the black pen there. Collagen type 4, okay? So this is coded for by the COL4A1 gene, and there's 6 of them, and the way they're numbered is 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 etc., all the way to 6. So COL4A2, A3, A4, 5, 6, and so on. And so there's 6 genes, multiple genes to create it, and that tells you how complex it is and how many different parts there are for everything to actually stick together and work in the way that we want it to. So this is an interesting one. I'm gonna change the color for a second. No, wait, let's just make the brush a bit bigger. So if let's go to size 10, like that, and then it's got a section over here, and then let's use this color over here. So it looks almost like a lollipop, right? And let's just draw another one underneath, and you'll see why in a second. Let's draw that there, bit of red there. Okay. So collagen type 4 is created as a, let's make that a bit smaller. as a monomer. And in the middle, you have the triple helix, okay? When you think of collagen, you almost, in your mental model, you have this sort of DNA-like structure. It's this springy looking thing, right? It's spiral in physical shape. And that's what we think of when we have collagen. But actually, if you have a triple helix of collagen on its own, it's completely and utterly useless because it serves no purpose, okay? It has to go with something in order to actually be used, right? So, as an example, in collagen type 4, on the end, you have this section here, which is 7S. That is basically, 25 amino acids long, okay? And then you have this section on the other side, NC1, so non-collagenous unit, right? So clearly you can see there's multiple different sections and they each serve a purpose. And the purpose is to allow the properties of the triple helix to play out. And every single type of collagen differs in respect to this. They may have a triple helix for the properties of the triple helix, but because it's used in a different physical location within the body, different physical location within the anatomy, it has different functions, and so it has to be a different shape, has to be a different length, has to be able to connect this thing together and this thing together in different contexts. And that's what these other bits are for. When it's produced, it then goes into a dimer, which is what this is. Just means 1 and 2 molecules put together, almost polymerized. And then you have this effect, okay? I'm gonna just make the brush bigger again. So let's say you have that. Like that. Let's have some red. And then let's have these colors again. And for all those, okay? That structure, in and of itself, if you just look at that and you didn't know that was collagen, you'd probably mistake it for something like chicken wire or a fence, okay, on the edge of someone's garden or on a farm, something along those lines. The reason collagen type 4 has this particular structure, collagen type 4 there, is because those ends of it, the non-collagenous unit as well as the 7S unit made up of 25 amino acids, they are like double-sided sticky tape. They can merge into each other as you're seeing here. But they merge in a particular way with particular angles and they can all connect into each other. And this structure then spreads in all directions, in two-dimensionally, shall we say, spatially. Why is that important? Ask us to pause the video if you want to have a think about it. But a fence, when you're creating a fence, when you look at a fence, it just goes all the way across in all the planes, or in that plane, but in all the directions. And thinking about where it is in the skin, in the dermo-epidermal junction, right in the middle, providing that elasticity, that glue to keep everything together, everything nice and tight. This means that being able to spread out like a fence in a single plane means that that plane, from the analogy in our skin, is the plane of the skin, so it goes all the way across. And so we've got this chicken wire going all the way across our faces in the dermo-epidermal junction. That's why it has to have that structure, you know. Generally speaking, collagen, okay, in general, is made up of, let's say, a general collagen structure would be something like glycine into proline amino acid structure, this is, and then something along the lines of, example, hydroxy proline. Collagen type 4 doesn't necessarily have that glycine in every third amino acid residue, but that's on purpose. That you know, it means that the bonds are different relative to other collagen, so it kinks up differently as well. And that's why you get this. If we look at collagen type 7 for a second, let's draw that over here. So COL, collagen type 7. This is made using the COL 7 alpha 1 gene. there's only one gene for collagen type 7, and you can see that in its much simpler structure. So let's draw that out here. Use a different pen size. What size is my pen? There we go. Okay. So we've got, let's say it's like this, and then we have a section there. We have, let's use green, a section there, and then purple, let's use a section there, and then let's use pink, a section on the end over here as well. And let's label those up. In fact, even before I've labeled it, you can see how different it is. They're not designed to stick together like type 4, but they do different things. So we have here CMP, which is a cartilage matrix protein. Let's split this green up into 9, because here we have 9 lots of fibronectin 3-like subunits. Then we have von Willebrand's or 1 Willebrand's factor A1, and then on the end we have something that resembles a Kunitz protease inhibitor, and this section here is the triple helix. Okay, now I've said in this diagram here it loops into the collagen bundles from above at the base of the DEJ to stabilize everything, to pick up everything in the dermis and to hook it into the epidermis. So that's how it stays tight, and it does that because of these different subunits that are in its possession, and that dictates its function. Just look at how different those things are, and tell me that it's not important to differentiate which type of collagen you're making with the product. The structure is so different, the position in the skin is different, the function is different. One of them, this thing here, Kunitz protease inhibitor, a protease is something that breaks down a protein. A collagenase breaks down collagen, which is also a protein. It comes with its own built-in protein degradation unit, repeller, shall we say, to push it away. And again, it's got fibronectin in there. It should start to be obvious now how important these things are. But actually, type 4 and type 7 are probably the most difficult type to make, which is a shame, because we've just said how important they are for anti-aging and visual purposes, and yet nature would have it that they're some of the most difficult to create. And knowing that they are based heavily, let me move this down, I've said here, they're based heavily on things like glycine and proline, and then you'll have something after that, usually as a repeating subunit, as a repeating codon, like hydroxyproline. You would expect glycine and proline to be in the formulation, and they are. We'll come to that in a second. But the formulation is everything, right? And I'm going to show you why other products can be inferior to Sunekos. And this is a fact. This is not opinion, what I'm about to show you. Let's draw a graph like that, and then go across. Let's just split that up here. So on the left, let's say we have the amount of amino acids that are in there. Let's say you have this representing less amino acids, and then eventually you'll get to 0. And then here you have like loads of amino acids, like too much, shall we say. Now, when the product that you are using has too few amino acids, it's the equivalent of someone telling you to make a cake, right? But they only give you 1 egg, like a tiny bit of sugar, a tiny bit of flour, a tiny bit of water, like a few drops. You just think, there's not enough to make a cake here. And the same with amino acids, because a protein is built of amino acids. In the same way, a building is just lots of small structures all put together. Protein is the building, and amino acids are all the small structures like the bricks. Okay, you string the amino acids together, you make a big chain, and they all fold into each other and everything, and they get your big protein. So the amino acids, if there's not enough, then there's just not enough to make the protein. So too few amino acids, you get incomplete protein synthesis. Okay, some companies then go the opposite way, and they just shove everything in as much as possible under this very dim-witted and very non-medically qualified perspective of more must be better, so let's just shove a load in there. And here they end up in this part of the chart. Let's use red. And they just don't make, there's no collagen type 4 or 7 at that point, okay? You get other types of collagen, and fine, you get other types, but we specifically want 4 or 7 for the anti-aging context to actually suck everything up back into the face to be nice and tight. But then you realize there is this golden window right in the middle, okay? In the golden window, that's where you get 4 and 7 specifically. So how do you get into that golden window? That is something which people all around the world have been trying to crack for a very long time. Professional Dietetics, the company behind Sunekos in Italy, they've been at it for probably around 30 years, something like that, and they have cracked it. And the reason we know they have cracked it is because they have been awarded the patent for it, and no one else has ever been able to make this much collagen type 4, collagen type 7, elastin, and fibronectin in a physiological way before. Okay, like I said, you might have something that causes a reaction to make a load of it, but then you just go back to baseline, like solar elastosis. To raise the level of baseline activity, i.e. the physiology, not the reaction, the physiology, that's the pattern, okay? Now, it does make type 1 and type 3 and things like that as well, which is why you don't need to then go and buy another product for those types as well. It does make everything, but because you want 4 and 7 the most, it gives you it the most. This golden window, to make that, you have a certain amount of amino acids, but it's not just an amount, it's certain amino acids. You have to figure out which ones, and they have to, you don't just put an equal amount of all of them in. There has to be a really specific ratio of all of them. Why? Because we've got our business here and we're doing market research to figure out what kind of trainers to buy. When the market conditions are perfect for this particular trainer, then we produce that particular trainer, right? And then we translate that analogy back. So the conditions have to be right for 4 and 7 to be made. They have to be right for 1 and 3 to be made. They have to be right for elastin to overexpress and then go back to baseline, like in solar elastosis. And so the exact formula is crucial, and that is what people have been trying to crack for a long time. That formula is High-6AA. And that's Sunekos, okay? That is what it has. That's why you see High-6AA on the box, and that's the pattern. That is that golden window where we're generating huge amounts of the exact type of protein that we want to make, 4 and 7. So I've just got an error message here. Let me just get rid of that. Okay. So always remember that. So when a company tries to say to you, we've got amino acids are amazing, we're controlling the extracellular matrix, and more companies are doing that now, and it's not a coincidence. And I will talk about other companies and other products, and I will name specific products and do direct scientific comparisons so you can see for yourself which one is best, or which one does this and which one doesn't. And when they say all these things, you have to question which amino acids are there, how much are there of each one, what's the ratio. And some companies, they don't even know when you're speaking to the reps, and that's very telling. Sunekos is very upfront and open about what's in it, and that's the important thing. High-6AA is made up of 2 parts. So we've got part 1 here, part 2 here. So we have the HA, which is 200 kilodaltons, and then we have the amino acids, which are 6 in number, 6 different amino acids. I don't know what the ratio is between all 6, because that itself is the pattern. The very professional dietetics will very happily tell you which 6, but the amount of each, that's the secret. So remember earlier I said HA is going to interact with these receptors, okay? But some of these receptors, like CD44, is used in really dangerous stuff as well, like tumor metastasis, cancer metastasis. So we have to check, is it high weight or is it low weight? Let's go back here. What is 200 kilodaltons? Okay. By the way, I hope it makes sense as to why you go through all this first, so that when we build on that knowledge and we talk about other things, it makes sense. 200 kilodaltons is low weight, okay? Low molecular weights, HA. But I've already said low weight is the bad one. That's pro-inflammatory, and it can trigger the bad stuff to happen. So why does Sunekos have that? It's a great question. If you've watched this before, pause it and try and test yourself. If you haven't seen it before, then first of all, yes, what's in it? But that's a question you need to ask to every product. If you look at the newer skin boosters, like I said already, they will name the weight. The ones that don't, you have to ask them, what is that weight? And then you ask, why are they not telling us in the first place? Sunekos is very open, that there's 200 kilodaltons, and specifically, I believe there's 35 milligrams of that stuff and 128 milligrams of that stuff. 35 milligrams is not a dose of this, that's in the whole vial, and you're only injecting a certain amount in each position. So 35 milligrams is a really tiny amount. So why, even though it's low weight, that's why it becomes acceptable, because, not necessarily because it's in a tiny amount, because it's in such a tiny amount that the body's natural metabolism of it is exceptionally quick. Within 1 to 2 days, depending on the person's individual baseline metabolism, that will disappear. That is just going to go straight away. But why is it there, even if it's used up? Because it's there to start the fire, okay? And then the fire will just keep on burning. It's there to, the cell is house. It's turned up outside and caused a bit of a fuss in the street. So what you've done is open your door, go, what's going on here? What's happening? And it's alerted you to something outside, but you've opened that door, and on your doorstep is a really nice package of a fantastic set of 6 amino acids. And you think, oh, I can't see anything. Oh, but I've got this really great package. Let's take that in. Let's open it and then let's use it. That's what's happening. The HA is causing a fuss outside, causing the cell to figure out what's going on, using the receptors, because that's how it communicates with the extracellular matrix. And then it finds in doing so that there's also like these amino acids in there, and that will then trigger things to happen, okay? But specifically these amino acids, it's important to know, we will go through what changes it makes, by the way, but it's important to know which amino acids. I cannot stress this enough. So many companies are duping you by not giving you this level of detail of which amino acids are in there. What is their structure? What is their function? What ratio are they in, etc., etc. I promise you, even just looking physically at the amino acid will tell you so much about the product. Because if you know that this amino acid and this amino acid are in there and they look like this, that means if they look like that with that structure, they have these properties. And if they have these properties, that's what this overall product can do as well. That's the perspective to have. So I'm going to tell you the amino acids. I'm going to go through them in detail. You might think it's too much detail, but I promise you by the end of the video, you will think, why isn't everyone else showing us their products in this level of detail, okay? So the amino acids themselves, in general, amino acids have a baseline structure which is the same, and there's one section of it which is different, and the bit that's different is what defines them from each other. So a baseline amino acid, let's use some different pictures. Let's say, let's go N, so nitrogen is N, H is hydrogen. Let's go in the middle with black, that's the central carbon, hydrogen there. And then at this end, let's use this color. We have COOH. Now the end bit there can also be written as just a H like that, or it can be like this, it's the same thing. Now on the left side, the amino acids have what's called an amine, A-M-I-N-E, group, as in amino, ammonia, and NH. Sometimes it's also called the N terminus, okay? And then on this side, we have the C terminus, otherwise known as the carboxylate. Whoops, let's go back. group. Okay, that makes something a carboxylic acid. These structures define a molecule, so we can say if it's got that, it belongs to this group or this type of molecule. So as an example, if you're giving your patients tretinoin cream, which is retinoic acid, that's going to be on the end of retinoic acid. So you've got a benzene ring, 15th carbon in retinoic acid, has a double bonded oxygen with an oxygen hydrogen coming off it. And that's what makes it a carboxylic acid, and we name that particular carboxylic acid retinoic acid, that's all. Now in the middle you've got the central carbon, which is the link between the N and the C terminus, simple hydrogen on top, and then underneath that, this is the crucial bit, okay? So we have the R group. That's the bit that's different, and that's the bit which defines what's going on. Let's just make that a little bit clear. So amino acid structure. Now with that in mind, let's get cracking. So we have glycine in high-6AA. So what does glycine look like? Let's draw the amine group, central linking carbon, the carboxylate group or carboxylic acid group. So what's its R group? What makes it glycine? In this case, it is a simple hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest element, hence why it's in the top left of the periodic table. Because it's the smallest one, it allows it to do certain things that the biggest one can't do. As an example, a collagen is made up of multiple strands, which we'll go into, but they have to be very close. If these R groups are really, really big, they just can't squeeze together. It's like having a really big load in your suitcase and trying to squeeze the top and the bottom of the suitcase together. They just can't get close enough because everything's pushing away in the middle with all the clothes. So with glycine being really small, you find it a lot in proteins which are made up of multiple different sections and have to be really close together because it doesn't take up much space. So that's the R group for glycine. Let's go over here. We also have proline. Okay, proline looks like this. Let's draw the N terminus, the central carbon. Proline is an interesting one. The R group kind of comes back on itself. It's a bit like this, like that. It makes a sort of pentagon about it. Now, just for your information, each of these junctions, like the change in direction, that's another carbon. That's all it is. So you can either write it as like that, and then each of these carbons has two hydrogens coming off it like that. But that usually takes ages to constantly draw, so instead we do it like this, if you're interested in the organic chemistry aspect. Now, glycine and proline, like I said before, are so involved in collagen. In fact, proline itself, interestingly, around 23% of collagen is proline. Collagen equals proline. And in fact, that's why a lot of companies that are looking at collagen supplements, they will have proline in there. And you might think, fantastic, they've done their research. It's heavily involved in collagen, so it must be in there. Wrong. That's complete and utter BS. I'm going to quote for you now. This is a reference. This is the reference itself. Barbul, 2008, B-A-R-B-U-L. Not sure what nationality it is. Barbul 2008 showed that dietary supplementation of proline plays no role in increase of proline usage in collagen, for instance. So there's no correlation between the two. Even if you took more, it made no difference to the proline levels in collagen or to the collagen levels at all. And that's really crucial for a number of reasons. Because first of all, it makes you realize that there's multiple ways to make these things, and there's multiple links in the chain. You don't just strengthen one link and expect the whole chain to get stronger. There are other links that need to be strengthened as well. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So instead of supplementing with proline, what could you do? I think it would make more sense to supplement with something, I'm sure this was in the paper as well, something like arginine, which is another amino acid, and then that converts into an amino acid called ornithine. Yes, and then that will get you into, this is a bit of a long name, glutamic semi-aldehyde, and in turn, you can make proline with that. Okay, so that's just an example of how you need to do your research before buying these kind of supplements. Another reason it's important is because if a company is selling you a product that generates collagen or is inductive of neocollagenesis, fine. Obviously now we know what type of collagen is it that it's making. You have to question that. You have to question if it's got HA, what type of HA. We know that 4 and 7 are only made with a particular golden window. Is it in that window? Clue, no, because there's only one company that's allowed to be in that window because of the patent, Sunekos. But it also tells you that with these supplements, if they're selling you these products, they've probably got a supplement line related to it, or some of them may have. And if the supplement has proline in there, chances are, obviously you can't really trust that with the scientific evidence that we have, but I probably wouldn't trust the injectable they make as well if something they sell alongside the injectable is untrustworthy. So pay attention to that if someone's coming to show you a product, and especially if it has a supplement line as well. And make your own mind up based on this as opposed to shiny brochures and things like that. What else do we have? We have alanine. Whoops, I spelled that really badly. Alanine. So let's draw the structure for that. We've got what have we got first? We've got the N-terminus, central linking carbon, and then the carboxylate group. So alanine is really simple. It just has one line connecting to CH3, or in other words, you can also draw it like this, carbon, like that, okay? Now, you could technically also just leave it at that, because the end of one of these represents a methyl group. Methyl is CH3, okay? Methane, the gas, is CH4. So a methyl group is CH3 bonded onto something else. For now, I'm just going to leave it as a single line, and it will make sense why, because it's easy to compare to other molecules. So if we look at, let's say, valine, so N-terminus, C, hydrogen, carbon, carboxylate group. Valine is like that, okay? Sorry. It's like this. It's a bit like a Y shape, if you like. And you can see it's a bit longer than the alanine one, but it's very similar in structure. And then we also have leucine. So N-terminus, C, carboxylate group, hydrogen, and leucine like that, is like that. Okay, so it's a bit like valine with an extra link in the middle, that's all. Then we have an interesting one. We have lysine, N-terminus, central carbon, and carboxylate group. Hydrogen here, and this is much bigger actually. This goes and then we've got NH3, but you can also draw that as, let me get rid of that, a hydrogen on each of these, and so on and so forth. To make it simple, I'm just going to put NH3, and it's a very positive side chain. Alanine, valine, leucine, they're neutral, just carbon and hydrogen. Lysine and proline in special cases. Leucine is a very positive. And you can see, I know the links in lysine are a lot bigger, but you can just see physically it's got more links, so you can imagine it being a lot bigger than the other ones as well, which is really important. Now, whoops, let's move that back. So how positive is lysine? And you may think, that's too much detail. I promise you it's not. And once you understand that and all these bits of information, when we build on it, you become an expert in understanding how to control anti-aging changes. So how positive is it? Pause if you've seen this before to try and test yourself. Assuming the pH is of biological media, i.e. 7.4, then the voltage is plus 10.67 volts. Okay, and it will become apparent as to why that's important. Okay, so I just got another message here. That's fine. Okay, so let me zoom out so you can see all of this. So those are the 6 amino acids that make up high 6AA, and they're in a very, very specific ratio with each other. So what happens is, using those, the cell then starts to make collagen with them, okay? Now, how is that collagen actually physically made? Well, it's done using this. So let's pretend, for instance, we have the, where shall I draw this? Let's draw it over here. Let's pretend we have the DNA. I'm going to use a different color. So the DNA kind of goes like that. Like this, okay? And then you've got the nucleotides inside, like that. And then let's draw a few over here, like that. Now these nucleotides in the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, so these are nucleotides here. Those green dots represent hydrogen bonds, okay? And it's important to understand why for this next part. Hydrogen, like I said, is the smallest element, right? And if you look at the atomic structure of something, let's draw that here. Let's do it over here. So we've got the center of the atom, which is a nucleus, okay? Don't confuse a nucleus of an atom with a nucleus of a cell, okay? One is a building block of the universe, one is a biological organism, okay? That is positive, it's called a proton, and then you've got a negative electron orbiting it, okay? That is negative, and that travels round like an orbit, like that. Now, hydrogen is positive. There is actually 2 atoms in hydrogen, but for, let's say it's 1 to make this a bit simple. There's a +1 charge and a -1 charge, therefore the net is 0. It's just a mathematical equation. It's a neutral product. Now, other atoms, much bigger elements, let's take, I don't know, calcium or oxygen as an example. There's more positives, or more particles. Sometimes you have neutral particles in the nucleus as well, called neutrons. But there's more particles or more positivity inside the middle, and it will be neutralized by more negativity around as well. So it's overall just a heavier atom. And that's why different materials have different densities, because they might have the same number of atoms, but each atom is heavier. Now, when something is a bigger atom with more positivity and more negativity around it, it has more ability to attract and repel other things around it, because there's more charge in charge, if you like. And these hydrogens are really tiny, so its ability to stick, let's say, a negative thing here and a negative thing here together is much less than if you had, let's say, 10 protons all together. They can pull much easier. It's a bit like the size of a magnet. You've got a tiny magnet, you're probably not going to pull something from over there. You've got a massive industrial sized magnet, you can probably drag a car from over there, right? This is a small magnet. Other atoms are big magnets. Why is that important? Because in the DNA, these hydrogen bonds are weak enough, because hydrogen is a small element, to be driven apart like a wedge. Let's just draw that for a second. I'm going to use a bigger brush size, like this. Okay. Let's color that in. I was never very good at art. Still not. Okay. 3, 2. Okay. This wedge is a bit like a snowplow. Okay. Let's pretend a lot of snow has fallen on the ground, and you're sending a snowplow out. The attachment on the front of this snowplow, it's in a triangle shape, so that when you drive through the snow, some of the snow falls this side and some of the snow falls this side. So it's a wedge separating everything. This wedge drives through the hydrogen bonds, and because they're weak from being a small element, they can displace. But they still have some charge, so you can glue them back together. It's like a reusable piece of sticky tape, or a reusable double-sided piece of sticky tape, because it's taking a nucleic acid here and a nucleic acid here and bringing them together. You can break it to read it and see what the sequence is, and then put it back together again. It's like a reusable link. Now this, let me label that here. This here, this wedge, this snowplow going through the road and separating the snow, can be one of 2 things. Either DNA helicase or RNA polymerase. Depending on, I'm not going to get too technical, but depending on how much of the DNA you're trying to read, it might be one or the other. Let's say it's DNA helicase for the sake of today. So what happens is this wedge is driven through the DNA, and you are then able to separate each side of it. Why would you want to separate? Well, these sections of the DNA, these nucleic acids, let's just label them for a second. So this side might be an A, this side might be a T, that side might be a G, and that side might be a C. A and T always go together, G and C always go together, no exceptions. So what does that mean? You know, if you have a magnet, right, and this side of this magnet and this side of this magnet are attracted, and I know that this side is north, I don't need to read this magnet. If that's north and they're attracted, I know that must be south, okay, and vice versa. If I know that's north and they're repelling each other, and I don't have to read this, I know that that's north as well. So in DNA, if I can split them and I only look at one side, that's all I need to know what the other side says as well, because I can infer from what I'm seeing here. So when you're trying to read what's in the DNA, you only need to read half of it, literally just 50%, because that codes for the other 50%. It's like a knock-on effect. So you split this and you only need to read one section. And you know, the sequence that you see of these A's, T's, G's, and C's correlates then to the sequence of amino acids that you string together, which in turn correlates to what protein you're making, and that's why proteins are so important. So we split them apart, and the RNA polymerase, or whichever one you want, that will then bring in RNA nucleotides. So let's get a color for that. So you might get, you know, it's reading a certain part of the DNA, and then it's bringing this nucleotide in, and then it reads another bit, and then it brings this nucleotide in, and then it reads another bit, and then it brings this one in, okay? Section of 3 can sometimes be referred to as a codon, if you really want to know. But eventually you get, you know, this string of a copy of the DNA. Now, you have to do this because the DNA is so precious, it can't travel out of the nucleus and be used up, because then it's gone. It's like, for instance, you know, if you've got a secret recipe, right? Coca-Cola, you know, okay, there's probably not many people in the world that know the exact recipe for this thing, and they probably keep it in a safe. So if you want to take that recipe out, you're not taking it, putting it in your pocket and taking it into your kitchen. You take it out for a split second, you copy it, you write down what's on it, and you put the original back in the safe, because it's too valuable, right? DNA is too valuable. So you can't just take it out, look at the sequence of it, and then put those amino acids together to make your collagen, right? You have to copy it. And this copy is then called mRNA, messenger RNA. That is what travels out, okay? So you've gone to the Coke factory, to the safe, where the recipe for this is. You've looked in the safe, you've written it, now you've shut the safe, which is letting the DNA come back together again, and you're walking out with your copy, and that's the cell walking out of the nucleus. Oh, that doesn't make sense, but the mRNA walking out of the nucleus with the copy of the DNA. So then what do? So the mRNA then goes out of the cell, out of the nucleus, I should say. So in this diagram here, let's zoom in to this cell diagram. The mRNA, let's draw it in there. That goes into the background of the cell. This is called the cytoplasm. Okay. In the cytoplasm, we have all sorts of structures. Think of the cytoplasm as the area that you are in. And you've got shops, you've got supermarkets, you've got flats, you've got houses. Everyone lives in this area. And in this section, we have, so in the cytoplasm, in this area of the cell, we have things like, for instance, let's use a different color. So let's make the brush bigger as well. Color that in. So this is what I'm drawing right now, is called a ribosome, okay? Ribosomes usually are made up of different subunits, maybe like a big one and a small one. And then I'm going to draw a Golgi apparatus here. Like that. These are factories in the cell, okay? There's lots of different factories. These can make proteins, they can glycosylate proteins. You've got, let's say, an area where vesicles are made. You've got an area where, you know, receptors might be put together and then added onto the outside of the cell or pushed through the cell. And then you've got the power plant in the cell, which, you know, everyone needs electricity. The power plant in the cell is called the mitochondria. That provides the energy, the power grid, going to all these other organelles in the cytoplasm so they can carry out their job. Like for instance, the ribosomes. That code's gone straight to my head. Let's go back to brush size 2. Okay, so this mRNA, let's get that purple back in, goes into the ribosome like this, okay? And it's got this copy of the DNA in it. And it's zipped along, you know, the ribosome zips along it, like one of those people there's machines that allows you to climb a tree very quickly. And the ribosome is sitting there, you know, like a person. The analogy would be, I'm the ribosome, I've got the mRNA here, which is a sequence of what to do, or sat in front of me. I've got a screen with the sequence, with the thing that I'm making, and I've got to string little bits together. So I'm looking at that, and I've got the chain going here. So I've got this amino acid here, and I've got to put my hand out like this. Someone gives me the next amino acid, I put that into there, that then moves along, put my hand out again, they give me another one, and I attach it, and this chain starts getting made in the other hand. But when I do this, the amino acid has to be brought there in order for me to then plug it into this. A bit like a child having one brick in its hand, one Lego brick in its hand, and someone giving another one, and then you plug it back in. And you make a longer and longer chain. Or if you're a child in a meadow and you've got these daisy chains, you're putting one daisy in another to make the chain, someone gives you another one, you put it in, etc., and you get this long thing. And then with that long thing, you can tie it and turn it into a necklace, do whatever you want. Same with proteins, they can be different things. So that's red, okay, in sequences. And the sequence there determines the amino acid that's then brought to it to then be joined together, and you get, let's use this color, out of it, this the protein. It might look like this, it might have little bits sticking out, whatever. That's the protein that's coming out. But how do these amino acids get into there? Well, think I'll do this with an analogy again. So let's pretend you live in the forest, right? And everyone lives in a tree house, and all these tree houses are connected with zip lines. So if you want to go see your friend, you don't need to go down the tree, walk across, and then up another tree. You just figure out from your house the zip line that connects you to your friend's house there. You hook yourself on, and then you just glide down, okay? So that's the analogy we're gonna use. The ribosome is in one of these tree houses, and it says, "Oi, I need some proline," or whatever, and you've got the proline. So what you do, and the proline could be like a jacket or a tie. So what you do is you put the hanger on the zip line, and you get the tie, put the tie on the hanger, and then you just let go, and it goes to your friend's house. Your friend is called ribosome. They then take the tie, and they can continue getting dressed and doing what they were trying to do. So the analogy here is, in the cell, let's go back to this cell diagram for a second. You've got, I'll draw it in yellow so it doesn't come up too quickly. So you obviously, sorry. These things, it's like a network, and it's called the cytoskeleton, okay? Everything is connected, everything is given structure inside the cell, and like collagen giving structure to the skin, but in an individual cell basis. And this is called cytoskeleton. Think of it as the motorway of the cell, okay? So you will have, let's say, the thing bringing the mRNA is a coat hanger, okay? Like that. And there's the hook. And then here's the zip line, whoops. Like that, and it can go up a zip line as well, let's say. This coat hanger that's bringing the amino acid, okay, let's say we've got a tie on there. Let's draw a tie. Okay, there's a tie on the coat hanger. that tie is the amino acid, okay, from your tree house that you're sending over. The coat hanger is called tRNA, transfer RNA. Transfer RNA transfers amino acids to the area that they're needed, okay? And that's what's happening here. So your tree house is sending your tie on a zip line to your mate ribosome's house. tRNA is bringing the amino acid to the ribosome. And it's easy to remember when you think of it like that. And then out comes the final protein that you're making, okay? And then once we have that, in collagen's case, this is why I'm saying this, we have a strand that's created, but we know that there's a triple helix in collagen. And we know that a triple helix on its own is actually completely useless, as I've said. Without all the things that go with it, triple helix has no purpose. It can't be used for anything. So once it's been made, it might go into something like the Golgi apparatus to have other things added onto it, like sugars onto the protein, as an example, okay? Let's go back to pen. And then you have a couple more. Triple helix, 3 strands, triple 3. So you might have, okay, these amino acids in a particular sequence, and depending on the R group, right? Some R groups are positive, some are negative, some are hydrophobic, some are hydrophilic, etc., etc. When you string a certain sequence of amino acids together, they will naturally fold and bend and twist into certain shapes, because the R groups, this R group and this R group are always going to attract because they're a North Pole and a South Pole. This R group and this R group are going to repel because they're both positively charged. And when different parts of the strand always connect and always repel, you just let go of the chain once it's made and it self-assembles. That's what's so fascinating to many people around the world, the ability for proteins to self-assemble. Imagine if we could utilize that technology in buildings, right? Self-assembly buildings or something. It's probably a long way off if we can ever do that, but that's what makes proteins fascinating. And in collagen's case, when we have this triple helix, the way it works is, let's pretend we're drawing some bonds on. Let's say we've got a bond target in this particular location, and they marry up to these bonds, right? So for the second strand, for its orange bits to meet the other orange bits, on the left-hand side, that orange can meet, but then for the right-hand side, it's too far away. So what happens? It has to wrap around the first one to use up some length, and then the oranges will meet. Same with the third one, it has to wrap around even more so the oranges will meet again. And that's just a rudimentary example, but using that example, you can understand how these things twist into each other to create that triple helix. But then it has to go through other processes to add, let's say it's collagen type 4, we have to add the NC1 and we have to add the 7S. Otherwise, there's nothing. We've not actually really made collagen, we've just made a helix for no reason. So that is the final process of the collagen being produced. And depending on, which gene we're looking at, which we know now, COL4A1 through 6, COL7A1, then we will create, this particular sequence or that particular sequence, which in turn will code for all the differences between both of these. So if it's COL7A1, we'll write out codes for the other sections in it, the cartilage matrix protein, kinase protease inhibitor, etc., etc. Okay, so that's how it's actually produced. Now, let's go through what actual changes you get when you inject this, because yes, we get collagen type 4, type 7, but you'll be amazed at what else actually happens when you inject this stuff, okay? I'm gonna get a black pen for this. There's black, there we go. So a really good paper to look at this is by Elena Fazzola, which if you ever meet her, by the way, one of the nicest people ever. She's a fantastic clinician. She works in Italy. And I thoroughly recommend you meeting her if you ever get the opportunity. So Elena Fazzola 2022. This is the paper that I'm referring to here, which showed these changes. So one of the changes that we get is, I spoke before about the snapback test when you pull the skin by the eye and it doesn't quite come back. And when you're really elderly, you've got all this cell dysfunction, then the skin just supports itself. And Eleanor showed that when you inject Sunekos, you more than double the efficiency with which the skin snaps back. There were patients who took more than a second, I think it was more than 2 seconds to finish that snapback test, and in just a few weeks it went to under a second. That's massive, massive improvement. So snapback tests, at least halves the time, okay? Another change that we see, wrinkles reduce by, and it's off the top of my head, I might be wrong, someone correct me in the comments if I am, they went down by around 44 to 71%, I think, okay? Why? Okay. Increase in type 4 and type 7 doesn't necessarily reduce wrinkles, okay? And this is really, really crucial. So when you have the fibronectin that's generated by Sunekos, you are increasing the stem cell differentiation, like we said, and keratinocytes in the stratum basale. Let's go back up. This is why we do this anatomy to start with. Here in the stratum basale, the keratinocytes multiply. When they multiply, they eventually make their way through the skin and then they shed off at the end. So if you're increasing the stem cell differentiation, if you're increasing the cell's movement ability, if you're doing all these things, and you're able to multiply so many more times as well, what happens is the thickness increases of the cell, of the skin. And when that increases, okay, think of it like this. If I was to fold a single piece of paper in half, let's, I've got a dollar here, right? Let's say that's a flat dollar. If I was to fold it in half and then really crease it like this, okay, I can unfold the dollar, but then if I bring this close to the camera, you can see there's still a crease in it, right? So it's flat, but you can feel the crease, you can see it, and guess what? It won't go flat anymore. It's maintaining that kink that we've made, right? It will naturally stay folded if I hold it like this, okay? Whereas, imagine I have a really thick section, let's say we've got like 1,000 sheets of paper. First of all, it's difficult to fold, okay, that tells you everything. So if I try and fold it, what happens when I let go? It just bounces back. Even if I tried to fold it and make a crease like this, I probably couldn't because it's too thick, right? And it's too springy because each one has an element of elasticity, elastic potential energy. On its own is very little, hence why you can do this. If you have a really thick wad, there's too much elastic energy for you to let you squash everything together, and that's why it springs back. When you are growing the skin so much with things like fibronectin, and you're causing this thickness increase, that's what you're doing. Your skin is going from this to that to a much thicker wad of paper, and that's why wrinkles are so much better. But your wrinkles don't go back to baseline like with Botox, because this is actual growth, not just freezing the movement, it's actual growth of the skin, right? Let's go back down here. Where were we? Where am I writing? There we go, okay. Another change that we see, okay, is redness. That goes down by 50%. Oops. And the product is not designed as an anti-redness product, but we have huge results in this, and in the best way possible. It's no use going after redness. It's useful to go after the root cause, and the root cause of everything is cell dysfunction. Sunekos is simply a cell function optimizer. It's not a collagen user, it's a cell function optimizer. So how best to describe this? Okay, I'm going to draw some skin here. That's the top surface. Let's say we have an area of thin skin, and then let's say we have an area of really thick skin, like this. And let's say we have the blood vessels there. Let's say that's the blood. And this is the blood here. Let's draw that in. When you're looking at someone's skin to see redness, what's happening is the light is going into your eye and you're registering red, okay? Now, generally the light source is, let's say, the sun or the light bulbs or something like that, but generally it's within the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum. So just to represent sunlight, I'm going to draw, I can't use yellow because it's too light on the screen, but I'll use orange. Let's say, for instance, we have you looking at the skin, and this represents your eye, okay? And we have another eye looking here. So I'm going to draw the sunshine coming down, okay? Whenever you're drawing radiation, such as a photon, you have to draw it in this wiggly way to differentiate between a directional arrow and radiation. Now, light can only penetrate the skin a fixed depth. Doesn't change whether you've got this skin or that skin or what room you're in. It's the wavelength of light that determines the depth of penetration, right? So that is only going to penetrate a certain level. So this here is obviously thickness. I know my writing's terrible, but I think you know what I mean. Now, what happens in sunlight is that you have all the different wavelengths at the same time hitting something. Now, what happens when it hits the blood here, which you can reach, is that the blood absorbs everything but red. That's the way it works in terms of a physics explanation. But because it's absorbing everything but red is allowed to go back out of the skin, shall we say. And when we look, the red is hitting our eye and we register it as redness. We perceive that as redness. So you get this, okay, from there. Okay, and that's what you're seeing, and you're seeing redness because everything else is being absorbed. Now remember, the light will only penetrate a certain depth. So let's say we're here and it goes down to this, okay? In thick skin, i.e. growing skin, and we've said now it's already growing because we talked about why the wrinkles are improved. It's not penetrating deep enough to have everything but the red absorbed by the blood. And so, because it's thicker, we're not seeing red as easily, not because we've actually reduced blood flow to the face. If anything, we've increased it because when you grow so much, you increase angiogenesis as well. But you increase it in a really healthy physiological way, so it's thicker as a skin. And so, we're not seeing red because it's only penetrating to this depth. And that's what we see, okay? We see just a healthy skin color and not the redness. There's nothing to do with treating redness. It's to do with optimizing cell function, and by doing that, everything starts to correct by itself, auto-corrects, because you're not going after each thing, you're just making the cell function better, so everything else gets better. I hope that makes sense. So another thing that we see is the pigmentation. Sorry, that's really terrible writing. Let me do that properly. There we go. Pigmentation. Pigmentation also went down by roughly 50%, okay? It's a really interesting way of correcting this, and it's not directly treating pigmentation. It's not designed as a pigmentation product at all, okay? But you get such incredible results for pigmentation with Sunekos. And I'm not just saying that, I'm going to show you proof. I'm going to show you actual cases where we've done it. And it's not just the quality, it's the speed of that quality as well, which shows you how good it works. Now, I'm going to show you that in quite a good amount of detail. So let's say the pigmentation, we've got, let's say these are the layers of the skin, right? Let's see if we can, no, let's just draw a few like that. Etc, etc. Now, I'm going to draw what is basically a melanocytes here, okay? The pigment cell. But there's something really crucial to understand in terms of pigmentation physiology. And once you understand that, it makes sense instantaneously as to why it treats pigmentation so well. So I'm going to explain how the pigmentation is becomes something visual on someone's skin first. So the melanocyte, which I'm sure you've all heard of, it isn't actually laying down melanin at all, okay? It's creating something called a melanosome, which is transferred. Melanosome transfer is key. So I'm going to tell you an analogy first, which is quite simple to follow, and then relate each part of the analogy to what I've got in front of me so you understand it a lot easier. Let's say, for instance, I want to send a present to my friend, Kevin, right? And the thing I want to send is some sun cream, okay? Really good sun cream, this, by the way. Yeah. So I want to send him this sun cream, but I can't just go to a letterbox and put this in the letterbox, clearly. So what do I have to do? I have to wrap this up, and then I have to put a stamp on it, and then post it in the letterbox, and then whoever is delivering it, let's say I send it via UPS or something, the UPS driver is going to have it in the van. He's going to drive. Okay, this is how we drive in a UPS van. So he's going to drive along like this, and then when he gets to Kevin's house, he'll give it to him, and then Kevin gets inside. Oh, what's Ab sent me? What's he sent me this time? He'll unpack it, and then he's got this, and then he will open it and put it on his face to actually change the color of oil. It doesn't leave a white cast, but if it was white paint, he will put it on his face, and then suddenly he would have white paint on his face, right? So easy enough to follow analogy. Sorry if it's patronizing, but if I do it like that, everyone understands, even members of the public who aren't medically qualified who might be watching this. So the melanosome wants to post a present to its friend, the keratinocyte, which is there. Actually, let's pick one a bit closer. Let's pick that one, okay? So that's Kevin, and the melanocyte wants to send him some color. So it can't just send the color because it'll get lost in the extracellular matrix. It packages it up in some packaging and then puts a stamp on it. That is then posted to Kevin. So let's get this a bit thicker. So it might have a road there, like that, and that's it, okay? So the melanosome goes, let's move this pen a bit smaller, along here, and is delivered to that keratinocyte by the UPS man. And then Kevin the keratinocyte opens his package, left at his doorstep, okay? He brings it inside the cell, and then everyone gathers around in the side and goes, "What you got, Kevin? What you got?" I'll open it up, and then he's got melanin. He realizes, okay, let's. And so what do you do when someone someone posts something? You open it, and then you put it wherever you're going to put it. If it's some shoes, you put it probably by the door. He takes the melanin and he puts it between the DNA and the sun, okay? And he applies. That's a good analogy. He applies his sun cream. The melanin is sun cream for the DNA, just like this is sun cream for our face, okay? That's the way it works. Now, that's the physiology of it being laid down. But what happens in Sunekos is that these dendrites, because, by the way, I need to say what they are. So dendrites are these things here. They're the arms of the melanocyte, or the road that the UPS man is driving. So when you have these dendrites situated in the skin, they are physically hooked into a keratinocyte. Imagine you're on a bus or an underground tube in London or the metro in New York. If you don't have a seat, what do you do when you stand still? You hold the railing like this, right? And whenever the carriage goes to the side, you swing to the side with it because you're holding onto this. And if the carriage swings that way, you swing that way. If the carriage stops, you swing this way because you're holding onto this, right? Now, these keratinocytes, when they multiply, and they will, because we've got things like fibronectin, remember, and we know what fibronectin does and how crucial it is for growth and wound healing. When a cell multiplies and it gets a daughter cell, it's like, the surface on a balloon. If you draw 3 points on a balloon and then inflate the balloon, they will always get further away from each other in every direction, right? So when these cells multiply, they always get further away from each other in every direction, just like the inflation of a balloon or the skin of an inflating balloon. And because these dendrites are hooked into those keratinocytes, as they grow and move further away, the dendrites are grown with them, okay? Interestingly, I can tell you that in one melanocyte, one melanocyte can interact with up to 36 whoops, keratinocytes, okay? So you can post presents to 36 Kevins, essentially, is what this is saying. And the reference is Kippenberger, 1998. Whoops. I believe it is in German though. Oder Kippenberger 98. How do you say that? Kippenberger 98, wenn Sie sprechen auf Deutsch. So we know that they're hooked on. We know there's a certain number. We know that when the keratinocytes grow, these dendrites get pulled further and further apart. We know that because in a lab, if you continue that growth ad infinitum, what happens is the dendrites physically get pulled off the melanocyte. So there's no limit as to how far they can grow until they just get pulled off by the keratinocytes' massive amount of multiplication. And so when you are producing the pigment, and we know how that works now, think about what happens when these dendrites are further apart. The amount of melanosomes being created to be posted out by the melanocyte is still the same, right? But when the keratinocytes grow, and we have growth that goes like that, and this can then, go so much further like this, think about what that's doing to the pigmentation, okay? Imagine I get some of this sun cream, right? It's gonna be, I think it's white, yeah? It's white like this, you can see it on the back of my hand. Now, that is pigment production by the melanocyte, okay? What you see there. If that's laid down in a tiny area, let me look at the screen, is it there? Yeah. If that's laid down in a tiny area, it's very, very easy to see. So in the skin, if all the pigment is laid down in one spot, you can see it very easily. But when the dendrites grow and it's spread out everywhere, it's the equivalent of doing this. It's still there, but it's spread out so evenly. It is now, that you can't see it anymore. The pigment is spread out so evenly, it's like spreading it out on your hand, and now everywhere is a much more even tone instead of one bit being excessively dark, such to the point where we label it as pigmentation. And that is all indirect because of everything else that we've talked about and everything else that it can achieve, Sunekos can achieve physiologically. As a result of that, redness improves without us even trying. Pigmentation improves massively without us even trying. And like I said, wait for the pictures because you will love them. So that's how even pigmentation gets reduced. But we also know, this is crucial, hyaluronidase activity reduces by 40%, almost half. If you're not medically qualified watching this, hyaluronidase is the enzyme which breaks down hyaluronic acid. We use it to dissolve fillers, both in an emergency and just in cases where the patient just doesn't like the filler anymore. That's crucial, but what's even more crucial is why it's able to reduce. How is it being reduced with Sunekos? This is not designed to inhibit hyaluronidase. This is, it's not a filler dissolver preventer, okay? What's happening here is we are taking advantage, let's zoom out, of what's in Hy6AA, i.e. the amino acids. Look at alanine, valine, and leucine for now. Look at the R group, the functional group. It's just carbon and hydrogen, i.e. hydrocarbon, right? If I draw a generic hydrocarbon structure, I'm going to draw ethane. Let's draw that, okay? Okay. Move that in the middle of the screen. That's a generic hydrocarbon structure. It's quite neutral. Let's draw water. H2O, it's like this. Now, oxygen is very large compared to hydrogen, right? Which means there's much more negativity around that nucleus it's a huge cloud of electronegativity. And remember, the hydrogen is just a single tiny positive nucleus around it, right? And what happens is you get this effect where the hydrogen's orbiting electron, it can be pulled by the oxygen into itself because its nucleus is so positive, right? And so you get this effect whereby the oxygen is relatively negative compared to the hydrogen, which is relatively positive here, right? And so when you have another water molecule nearby, it aligns itself up according to the electrical charges like this. So you might get another one where the hydrogen is there, oxygen is there, and another hydrogen is there, because the positive of that attracts to the negative of this, and the negative of this attracts to the positive of this, okay? And that's how it works. And because they can slip and slide over each other very easily, if you extrapolate that scale back up, you get liquids, okay? You get water. They can flow over each other very, very easily because the charges are just swapping from one to another. Whereas a hydrocarbon, it can only mix with other hydrocarbons, which are neutral. Trying to put, water in with the oil means that the negativity of that oxygen will just be repelled by the negativity or the relative negativity of what's in the hydrocarbon, by the carbon there. And the hydrogens from the water and the hydrocarbons will just repel each other. Hence why, by the way, oils are made up of hydrocarbons, right? Hence why if you get a cup and you put water and oil in it, they will not mix. They separate out immediately. So one is a non-polar substance, the oil, hydrocarbon, and water is polar. Polar meaning it's got opposites, positive and negative. Polar substances mix with each other, non-polar mix with each other. You can't mix them together unless you have an emulsifier. Certain products like, shampoos, gels, whatever, they may have emulsifiers, or even certain supplements may have emulsifiers because there's a polar and a non-polar component, and they can't mix unless you have an emulsifier which has one end of the molecule which can attract the oil and the other end which can attract the water, shall we say, and that's how they mix together. So when we look at, let's just separate that out so we don't get confused. When we look at the structure of alanine, valine, and leucine, so 1, 2, 3, in terms of their what's making them up, they are all hydrocarbons. Okay, they're all just carbon and hydrogen. What have we said? Oil and water, hydrocarbons, or pure hydrocarbons and water, non-polar and polar don't mix. So we've got half of the high 6AA, even glycine technically is a hydrocarbon, and proline. But we've got these hydrophobic components in high 6AA, alanine, valine, and leucine. The hydrophobicity stems from the R group because it's made of pure hydrocarbons there. And what happens is that repels water because oil and water don't mix, remember? And so when we inject it and we push the water away, it means that naturally will mean that hyaluronidase is not needed as much because it's attracted to water, right? As well as that, let's look at lysine here. Really big R group, okay, especially compared to the other ones. But what's key is this section, that positive at the end, and it's really positive. Like I said, 10.67 volts. That's really significant, If we look at the end, or the C terminus of some of these amino acids, let's extend that round, and let's say that's a negative charge, and that's relatively positive. The negativity on these side chains is probably anywhere from around minus 0.38 to minus 2.42 volts, something along those lines. And so when you think about that and you see that the side chain of lysine is almost 11, you see the massive difference in charges, or on the size of the charge, whether it's positive or negative. And hyaluronidase, I believe, it has an element of electropositivity to it. As a molecule, it is slightly electropositive. And lysine, we've just said, is very, very positively very positively charged in its side chain. Two positives will repel. Two north poles and a magnet repel. Two south poles and a magnet repel. And so when we have lysine, we're pushing the hyaluronidase away. When we've got the hydrophobic properties of alanine, valine, and leucine pushing the water away, is it any wonder that we achieve this figure of almost 50% or 40% hyaluronidase activity reduction? Okay. you start to see now, Sunekos is not a wrinkle product, an anti-wrinkle product. It's not a redness product. It's not a pigmentation product. Technically, it's not even a type 4 and type 7 or fibronectin or elastin product, in my opinion. It's a cell function optimization product. And when you are in that golden window, you not only get all these incredible things, but you get the best type of anti-aging collagen as well, type 4 and 7, and nothing else can do it because it's patented. Remember, High-6AA is patented. So what does the actual product look like then? Let me get for you this here, okay? So this is what you actually get inside the box. So each vial here, what the hell was that? 3.5 mil here. 3.5 mil whole. So the whole box is 7 mils, okay? Now it's runny like water almost, okay? Just slightly less runny than water because of the amino acids in there, but it's clear, it's completely transparent. But the crucial thing is, I wonder if I can zoom in on that, there we go. It's mixed in the box. You can see the red cap, it's still sealed, okay? It's pre-mixed. If any of you have ever used the old Sunekos 200, you had to mix it yourself. Why has it changed? Because this section here, this golden window, is, you can see it on that chart. It's a certain thickness that I've drawn. But in real life, it's such a thin sliver, right? If I was to draw it, it wouldn't be big enough for you to see. It's that tiny. It's that perfect that it has to be. And when you're mixing it in your clinic, some people are using different length needles, different gauge needles, different size syringes, different shakiness of their hands. You're never going to get the same exact ratio of everything depending on who's mixing it. And when we know that the golden window is so tight, we can't afford for the efficacy of the products to go up and down based on the mixing it happening in different clinics. So when it's pre-mixed, the homogeneity of it all around the world is identical. It's so important to get it right. It's not left down to chance, and it has to be done for you by a machine. And that's why it's pre-mixed, okay? Let me just move this out of the way a sec. We have some contraindications here somewhere. Where are they gone? There we go. Let's zoom in. Essentially, it's the obvious stuff, pregnancy, breastfeeding, active skin infections, massive systemic diseases and conditions, things like that. If you've got anything like that, don't do it, but that's pretty obvious. You don't need to be told. Take a screenshot of that, take a picture of it, whatever you want. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I think it's quite obvious. Langer's lines, these are quite important. Langer's lines from Karl Langer, as you probably might have guessed, they are a way of simply visualizing where the folds are going to happen as the aging process occurs. So, it's not very bright anymore, is it? The sun's gone down. They are a way of visualizing where the skin is going to fold over time. Now, why is that important? Because when we're making up the protocols for usage of products like this, if we can visualize that and treat in the perpendicular plane, we can reverse the laxity and the sagginess and the wrinkles a lot easier. So bear it in mind, and it's useful for when it comes to injecting. It's not unique to Sunekos, this is just a concept that's already been around. So I'm going to also show you, let's write it around here. So don't just think you have to just go and inject this, okay? An example treatment plan might be, let's say we use Performer. And you can see on this Sunekos box on the left-hand side on the logo, it says Sunekos Performer. So you might use that, plus Sunekos 1200 in the first session, and then after that, just Performer, depending on what you do, okay? It shows you how sensitive these things are in terms of creating the optimal results and outcome. 1200 is a sister product that goes with Performer, okay? And the weight of it, as you can probably guess, is 1200 kilodaltons, whereas that in Performer is 200 kilodaltons. The point of the 1200 is so that you allow the performer to do its work properly, right? That's the heavier HA in the 1200 sets up the environment in the skin. It is a free radical. It's an antioxidant, getting rid of those free radicals by scavenging them. It's anti-inflammatory. It protects the fibroblasts. Once you instill this in the skin, everything the performer wants to do can happen unhindered. It's like, for instance, if you are going to perform in a concert, there are people that come onto the stage for you, set everything up, and they test the equipment, and they do all this stuff, check the electricity is working, check that everyone can hear you, check the speakers, blah, 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 and then you come on, and you don't have to stop your performance halfway through because something's not working. It's been tested for you. In that way, the 1200 is coming in, creating an environment that is easy for neocollagenesis to occur in, and the performer is coming in knowing the stage has been set, and then neocollagenesis can occur. But there's very, very specific ways to inject them. Remember, the performer has 200 kilodaltons, 1200 has 1200 kilodaltons. Let's refer back to our anatomy here. Don't forget this. CD44, they're interacting with CD44, but HA, whether it's high weight, medium weight, or low weight, they all interact with CD44. So how can you inject them in the same place? There's specific ways to inject them so you don't get competition for the receptor amongst the different HAs, and they can both provide an effect in the skin, in the face, or wherever you're injecting. And so that's why it's very important to use them in very, very specific ways. The way you use it is as specific as that golden window and the specific formula that you have to create in order to be inside that golden window as well. So I've just got another error message on the computer here. There we go, that's fine. Now, let's just zoom out very, very slightly. I'm gonna show you, I'm really excited about this, some results, okay, just to give you an idea of what's possible. Look at this guy here. I'm gonna zoom in, okay. This guy is a doctor, right? He is a delegate that came to be trained by me, and that's quite not very bright, is it? He came to be trained by me, and he had the treatment as part of his training, and everyone else in the room could watch it and things like that as well. That is literally, as what I've written suggests, 4 days, okay? A lot of products, and I'll talk about other products specifically. I know you're probably thinking, what's it like compared to Profilo? Is it better than Profilo? How do you use it with Botox, whatever? I'm gonna name other products specifically. I'm not gonna pussyfoot around, directly compare them and give you my honest opinion and the science behind them. Other products may need, 3-4 sessions over the course of 1 to 2 months. This was 1 session in 4 days, less than 100 hours later. And if I draw a line for it, for example, let's say there, look at the pigmentation difference between either side of that line, okay? If I look at the pigmentation, let's say right in the middle there, and look at it compared to here and then here, they're much, much closer together compared to the before picture. Now, this is what he had to say, okay? Have to admit, I was fairly skeptical about the pigment aspect of Sunekos. The difference within a few days is visibly different, and actually amazing how significant the change is, okay? He was a skeptic. He'd never had it before. He has a medical background, so he has the capability of criticizing things technically, and that's what he said, and that's the result that he sent me just a few days later. There's not many, even pigmentation products are not going to get your result necessarily in 1 session, and let alone in that speed. Sunekos, I said before, is not a pigmentation product. It's not a redness product. It's not a wrinkle product. It's just so good at optimizing cell function that everything corrects at the same time. That's how you know you're onto a winner. It does everything at the same time, right? Let's have a look at this particular case. The lighting is slightly different, I'll admit. However, it's enough for you to see the texture change, which is huge, right? This particular patient, first session I did 1200 and Performer, and then we did about 5 sessions, I think, of just Performer. And there's very specific ways of calculating that as well. Look at the texture change. I mean, it's like a completely different skin. And even, again, the pigmentation aspect, it's not gone. Let me just draw on it there. It's not gone. However, look at the difference in color from there to there, and then from there to there. They're so much closer together, the pigment. The contrast is massively reduced. And again, it's not a pigmentation product, right? This patient was in her 70s. never had any cosmetic treatment in her entire life, right? 7 decades of having no treatment to prevent aging, and in a matter of, I think that's probably what, 2 months, something along those lines, texture decades younger, pigmentation several shades lighter. That's incredible. I'm so excited about stuff like this. We could even look at hands. Let's have a look at hands here. Again, you don't need me to point it out, but look at how easily the vasculature is visible there, and compare that to there. You know, we are generating type 1 and 3 collagen as well. It's not as though you need Sunekos for 4 and 7 and then something else for 1 and 3. If we didn't generate 1 and 3, you wouldn't have that plumpness increase in the skin as well. Hence why the vasculature isn't as easy to see. You know, I don't need to describe that too much. I think you can see that very easily. Even that bit and that bit, it speaks for itself. You know, it's not a hand product. It's not a skin thickening product, but it does everything, right? And there are specific protocols that you have to use for the hands as well, not just in terms of the pattern in which you inject, but in terms of how you combine the different products together to get the correct effect as well, right? Now, all of that is, let's zoom out for a second. I'm just gonna draw a line. Whoops. I'm just going to draw a line. That is Performer. Right. All the theory that I've just explained to you is applicable in other types of the Sunekos injectable line that I'm going to show you now as well. However, there are different indications. So we also have Sunekos Body, right? Now, Sunekos Body, let's just title that and zoom in, zoom back in. So its main indications are 1, skin laxity, and 2, stretch marks. Okay, so laxity in the sense that, you know, we're targeting laxity in the face with Performer as well. Stretch marks, sometimes you might refer to them in studies or see them referred to as SD. It just means striae distensiae, that's all. It's a technical term. Now, when we're treating things like the stretch marks, the skin laxity, things like that, all the science of how the proteins are made using Langer's lines, you know, these amino acids you can see in the corner, how ribosomes work, it's identical, right? That never changes. So that theory is applicable to body, but the difference with the body is that the formulation is slightly different, okay? So how is it different? So formula. So 1, you still have the high 6AA, that is not changed, but the electrolyte composition in the interstitial fluids between the face and the body has a difference. So you have a different solution to Performer, right? Now, what is an electrolyte? Okay, it's in this context, it's things like, you know, sodium, that's a positive, potassium, and then you've got calcium, that's 2+, potassium is minus, I believe. And remember, and this is why we go through the amino acids, remember, you've got things like lysine with its positive charge. If you just shove high 6AA into an area that has other charges, especially other positive ones, what the hell's going to happen? It's going to be pushed away, or something's going to be pushed away, and you haven't got high 6AA anymore. You just got a random collection of 5 amino acids because the lysine has been pushed out of the way. So you have to account for what environment the high 6AA is going into, and that's why you have to put it in a different solution for using the body. If you get Performer and think, oh, this is great, and just shove it into the body, I've tried that before as an experiment, nothing really happened. Because the high 6AA isn't allowed to work. It's not allowed to get to work because there are these flies in the room constantly annoying it, which are these electrolytes, and they're changing the electrical environment of the body. You know, everything in the body is tightly controlled. The electrical environment, the temperature, the acidity, the water content, the pressure, the etc. etc. One of those things goes off, everything is screwed. You know, let's say the temperature. If it goes too low, let's not even talk about an area, the whole body. If it goes too low, we go hypothermic. If it goes too high, we get a fever, right? These aren't good. Everything's finely controlled. So we have to think about the environment we're injecting into, and the product has to take into account that environment in order to protect the crucial formula that is the golden window, that is the high 6AA, the patented formula. And so that's why we've got a different solution in there. Now we can still use Langer's lines, okay? So when you inject it into certain areas, we're still using the same principle, right? You're still gonna fold in the body, just like the face, but in different angles based on the different musculature that we have and the orientation of that musculature as well. So if we look on the back, for instance, I'll just draw on it here. We've got the We've got the latissimus dorsi, which is probably, again, roughly speaking about that shape. I know it's not exact, but it's going to contract roughly in that direction, shall we say. And so the Langer's lines, the folds go all the way across it like this. And we use that when we're designing protocols for this as well. That's the beauty with Sunekos. You don't have to remember protocol diagrams. You understand principles, and you can work everything out for every patient that would ever come in front of you for yourself instantaneously. There are some contraindications. They are here. I'll leave them there for you. If you want to take a picture, feel free. It's pretty obvious stuff. The only thing I would add, apart from the obvious, is if someone has such laxity that you can almost grab that skin and almost pull it off, they need surgery. Excess skin, just refer them for that. So you have to be realistic. If they've got excess skin, it will improve to some extent, but you're not going to get the effect of a scalpel and take everything out. So warn your patient, pick your patients carefully. As long as there's laxity and not excess skin, you can get a big improvement, okay? I'll just get rid of the contraindications there. So I have some arm pictures as well. Let's have a look at that. There we go. I mean, that patient is in their 60s. I believe it's a patient of Ellen 60s, it's not just about the age, it's about what the age represents. It represents such a decline in cell function as we all get, but by that point, it's so reduced. I mean, you can see that at rest, it looks like there's excess skin. And yeah, excess skin, but look at it, it's tightened up massively with just a couple sessions. I think that was 3 sessions, a couple of weeks apart. But again, there's specific ways of planning it for each patient and the way you inject as well. That's really, really crucial. But you can see how powerful it is. Let's have a look at another arm one. Look at that. You know, let's move it there and make it a bit bigger as well. So again, that bit, let's draw on it, yes we can. Look at that. It does look like excess skin. I'm sure you could probably pull that off. And it probably won't even snap back. Okay, talking about snapback tests. And look at that, huge, huge change. In that, I'm gonna guess that was probably only a couple of weeks knowing the product as well. Let's have a look at the abdomen. This is really good for women that have had children, for instance, because things aren't necessarily tight in this area like they used to be. Look at that. I don't even need to point out these massive zones here. Huge, huge. And look, it's not just that, look at the increase in shadowing here. It shows the actual sort of depth going in and coming back out. Whereas in the post-op, from here to here, there's not much dip in the skin anymore. The whole thing is tightened up, and you've got this nicer contour as well. There's almost like a body contouring thing. But that's incredible, really incredible. I'm going to show you some stretch marks. But before I do, it's important to understand what stretch marks are. So stretch marks, let's write over here. So striae distensiae. They're generally coming from excess growth that is greater than the rate of, my writing is terrible, cellular growth, right? So when you're going through puberty, as an example, sometimes you go through these growth spurts, right? The growth spurt happens, and your rate of size increase is outpacing the rate at which the cells in the dermis, epidermis, and the DEJ can multiply to keep up with that. So what happens is skin's growing, but then the cells can't keep up and they get pushed away, right? It's like, imagine you're holding hands with someone and an earthquake happens, in between you both, and the surface area of the world increases because there's new earth being created and it pushes you apart, but you're holding hands, and then eventually you've got to let go because you're too far away from each other, right? And that's what happens. There's a tear in the dermis, epidermis / DEJ, and you get this scar formation. And that's essentially what's creating a stretch mark. That's why you get it in things like pregnancy as well, really rapid growth in the midsection. Sometimes you get it in obesity. If you're just eating too much too quickly and you put on size, then you get that stretch mark as well. And one day it will happen, you'll never feel it. And then suddenly that's the birth of a stretch mark, which will then take shape over some time. So if I show you some stretch marks, look at this. That, it just doesn't exist anymore, right? And it's really crucial to understand this from a biological standpoint. It's a tear, it's a scar. Sunekos is no longer just optimizing cell function directly, it's optimizing tissue function, because the entire tissue is now able to take away tissue that's serving no purpose, a scar, and replace it with brand new cells. So it's not just optimizing function of what's there, it's actually taking away things that have no function and replacing it with brand new stuff which is still functioning just as optimized as everything else has now been made to function as optimized as. So, think about that, and think about the fact that it's not just helping cells, it's the recognition of bad cells as well, which is huge. And that's how we can get results with stretch marks. And that's literally a tiny needle, maybe a couple of sessions, and you're done. Like, what would you have to do before? Maybe things like laser resurfacing and all the risks that come with it, which is a much higher cost as well. Why not just inject something like this? Very, very simple, much easier, much cheaper for both you and the patient. Job done. Let's have a look at some more. Here's another one. Let's make that a bit bigger. I'm going to draw on that. Whoops. There. It's still slightly there, probably about there, and a little bit there, but there are places where it's completely disappeared as well, which is incredible. And that is, it's not just, it's a stretch mark in terms of a different color, right? Again, pigmentation aspects, healthier functioning melanocytes and the dendrites, but it looks like it's possibly got a bit of texture to it as well. So it's literally smoothing out the skin, as well as wrinkles, redness, pigmentation, taking out scar tissue, etc., etc., all at the same time. Incredible, again. So let's take a look at one final picture. So this particular one is incredible. I think it's such a dip in the skin, it's such a deep tethering of the skin, a tethered scar. So what it's doing, okay, when you have a tether, let me draw what's going on for you. If you have the skin there, and then it's dipped like this and then comes back up, what's happening is that you have fibers pulling it down, anchored to something below, and that's why you have this dip coming down. So what's happening when we inject Sunekos here? It's actually breaking down tethers which prevent the skin from being smooth. It's no longer just functioning it's no longer just optimizing cell function, it's optimizing the environment itself that it's been injected into by taking away things like this. Hence why you can get a tethering, a dip in the skin, and it's almost completely smooth afterwards. Again, that will just be a couple of sessions, a couple of weeks, no lasers involved, no skincare, nothing like that. And it's immediately flattened off. They may have used some Sunekos skincare line actually, probably as part of the study, I don't know, but it's the injectable doing the majority of the work there. And I'm so impressed with things like that. Let's just minimize that, let's move out the way, and let's just get a black pen. So that is all of body. I'm going to talk about specific products because I know you all want to say, oh, is it better than Profilo? Is it better than this? Is it better than that? And they're great questions to ask, and it's important to look at that. But I have to stress, okay, all of everything I'm about to say is my own opinion and not that of any company at all. It's my own individual opinion, I have to say that. So let's zoom back in, give me 1 second. So how about comparing it to, let's say, Sunekos versus, say, let's say Profilo. That's going to be a common one. I've used Profilo in the past, you know. This is just my personal experience. Patients have it. They might have some short-term improvement, like a swelling or some plumping, and then it's gone. You know, I've never had anyone have a long-term result from Profilo. Maybe I was using it wrong, I don't know, but I was using it exactly the way they teach you to use it. And I'm just not impressed. Now, let's look at what is in Profilo. Let's look at it from a scientific perspective, not just opinions. So it has the high molecular weight HA as well as a low molecular weight HA. Let's go back to our window, our golden window. Okay, in the middle of that screen there. You know, there's no amino acids. Where's the ingredients for the collagen? You know, it's just not there. So you're not going to be generating as much type 4 or type 7 there. Obviously, you might get the HA that generates this sort of swelling effect, which then disappears. But then you go back to baseline. It's not going to give you a long-lasting effect, is it? There's no physiological increase in things like this particular type of collagen production. And it is in, Profilo is in this section here. Okay, not enough AAs. In fact, it's 0 there. There's nothing. So you're nowhere near that golden window for optimal cell function and maximum amounts of type 4 and type 7, right? So I'm just not interested. And then if you look at, by the way, because of the pattern, that's going to be a common pattern, right? Pattern of patent behavior. Because nothing else has that pattern. You're going to get that answer given for a lot of different products. But Profilo, yeah, no amino acids. It's nowhere near as much cell function optimization. If we look at, let's say, Sunekos versus what else do people compare it to? Filart. I'm not sure of the spelling of this. This might be wrong. Filart. Now, I really need to stress these are my own opinions and no one else's, right? Let's pretend you are entering the sport of Formula One. You need to create a car that's really quick, that can win races. To shorten that journey of creating the quickest car and to save money, what do? You look at the car that's winning the most and take as much inspiration from that. Oh, you copy it, okay? And if you're going to copy it, you're going to copy another car. What you copy the one that's winning. There's no point copying the one at the back that always finishes last, is there, for obvious reasons. So when someone is copying someone else, it says a lot that that's the one that's being copied, right? I'm going to show you some. I'm going to show you some branding. Sunekos has been around much longer, fact. And now look at the branding between the two. Okay. You make your own mind up as to what's going on there and if someone is copying someone else. I'm not going to say someone is or isn't. You make your own mind up, but I will describe the images to you in case you're blind. Models, female models with bare skin, plain background, plain monochromatic background, bright color used on the model's skin going over the model's face. That could be describing either one of those. Sunekos has been around for longer. I'll let you decide who's copied who on that one. Now, I was, and that says a lot, by the way. Remember, if you're going to copy a car, you copy the one that wins the race, not the one that's constantly losing. Apply that principle here. Now, I was speaking at an event on Harley Street a few weeks ago at the time of recording this, and I was speaking at an event talking about Sunekos, and there was another key opinion leader from Filart there, Professor Saeed Haq. And we both spoke, and during my presentation, I spoke specifically about type 4 and type 7, and I gave explicitly the exact things that Sunekos is patented for producing maximal amounts of in a physiological way. When Professor Haq was talking about Filart, conveniently he never said which types of collagen it's actually making. Until we got to the Q&A at the end and we were all sat at the front taking questions from the room, I asked him, which type of collagen are you making? And he said, you know, he admitted type 1 and type 3. And then he went, oh, and a bit of type 4 and 7. There's some type 4 and type 7 as well. Probably he had to say that because I was sat in the room as well. Otherwise his product wouldn't look very good. But why would you want a product that has a bit of type 4 and 7, almost like an afterthought, versus the one that's so significantly strong, it's got a patent for being the most productive in the world in those molecules, in those proteins. And we've already said, again, this is why we do it this way, we go through the anatomy first. We've already said 1 and 3, where these blue lines are, okay, in that anatomy diagram, here, whoops, here, they're not joining the layers together, so they're not tightening everything or anything. It's the green lines connecting things together, the type 7, and this here, the type 4, that glue, that sandwich, that basement membrane that's keeping the epidermis and dermis together. So which would you rather have more of, 4 and 7 or 1 and 3? Left or right? You decide, okay? We also have, what other things do people compare to? NCTF, I think that's one that I've been asked about before. Sunekos versus NCTF. NCTF is quite comical, I think, because you look at this tiny vial and then they give you this list of everything that's in it, and it's about as long as my arm. I mean, there's so many things in it, and I just think, have they just gone to a factory that offers mesotherapy products and just gone, I'll have everything and put it into a product? You know, you look at what's in there, and I was in a conference in Monaco recently, and I went to the filament stand just to ask for some information. I said, which amino acids are in there? You know, how much of each? Can you tell me, etc. I was just curious. No one could answer those questions, and they even got one of the managers to open up a laptop and open up the sales presentation, and it wasn't in the presentation either. And it's crucial because we know for a fact now that this concept, this graph, exists out there in nature. So if you don't know where you are on that graph, how can you claim to be really anti-aging? And NCTF is in this category here. Profilo is going to be here, NCTF is going to be here, in my opinion, because it's just got way too much for everything. And what happens is you're not generating the type 4 and 7, and that's what you get. There is no marketing material on NCTF or any sales rep that can say we maximally produce type 4 and type 7, because I just think the fact is they don't do that, so they can't make that claim. And it's because it's in that upper portion of that graph, right? Let me go back to here. So I'm not that interested because they've just gone way beyond that golden window, whereas Profilo has gone way below it, okay? And that's how you look at them. A lot of people will also ask me specifically about how you combine, have I got space here? How you combine Sunekos either with or without Botox. Long story short, you don't combine them, you don't do them together. Not because there's an interaction and something bad will happen, but because there's just no point. What are you going to gain from bringing them together? Nothing. Why? And this is really crucial. Every time I teach this, people's mouths sometimes drop open and they have these light bulb moments, so please pay attention. Watch this more than once if you need to, and you may not believe some of the things I'm about to tell you, but I will back it up with scientific references which you can read. Some of these references are even in previous videos on my YouTube channel. Go back and watch them if you want to. Botox, okay, these papers are important. Min 2015, Min 2016, okay. Min 2015 showed that Botox significantly reduces the skin's ability to produce sebum where it's injected. Now you may think, who cares, it's sebum. But I've already said today that every biological environment in an organism is finely controlled, just like the Earth orbiting at a particular distance from the sun. Any closer would freeze, any closer would boil, and any further would freeze. Let's take some characteristics of biological environments like tissues in our skin. Temperature, acidity, water content. If it's too hot, we'll get dehydrated. If it's too cold, we're going to get hypothermia in us, okay? Now, and if it's too cold, vessels constrict, okay? It's not enough blood coming to particular areas. Let's take acidity. If it's too acidic or too alkaline, nothing can function because everything needs to work in a particular acidic environment. Just like these amino acids, they get interfered with depending on the acidity. So when we look at, let's say, water content, sebum it's obviously reduced. And it's, Allergan, who make Botox, I'm sure they will agree with that. Even they can't disagree, surely, because some people say use Botox in acne as a sort of meso Botox, just inject it in tiny doses all over where the sebum glands are, and you get less acne. Or, you don't get less acne really, you get less oiliness. So there's proof that it reduces the sebum because it's used specifically to reduce sebum. So what do you think happens when you just constantly keep using it? When you lose that sebum, let's go back to our amino acid section here. Sebum is an oil. Let's look at the bottom left of what we've drawn. Oil is a hydrocarbon, right? Water does not mix with oil. So when you have sebum being produced by the skin, say in the top, and the water inside the skin underneath, what benefit do you think that has? Water and oil don't mix. So if you have sebum on top, water cannot evaporate through the skin and be lost to the atmosphere as easily through a process called transepidermal water loss. You take that sebum out, water is lost more easily. You take that sebum out, the integrity of the skin can be lost because it's crucial for certain things, right? And so what do you expect to happen when something so crucial as water content can then be affected, or oil content can then be affected in the skin? Everything. Just like everything is affected if temperature's off, everything is affected if acidity is off. So if that's completely eradicated where it's injected, you would expect the skin to be massively weaker. And that's exactly the data that was found. Min 2016 showed that Botox reduces elasticity in the skin, right? It reduces biological elasticity, net elasticity, and viscoelasticity in the skin. These properties were observed after botulinum toxin type A injection in Min 2016. Now, when you realize that, Botox reduces elasticity. What happens when we age? Elasticity reduces. So if Botox does the same thing as the aging process, how is it anti-aging? It's not, let's be honest. For me, it's pro-aging because it does the same as aging, right? And Sunekos, we know after everything we've spoken about today, massively increases elasticity and skin integrity and cell function. So you've got something that increases elasticity, and Botox which decreases elasticity according to Min 2016 and 15. So why would you put them together? That's like, you're achieving the opposite of them, So there's no point biologically to put them together. It's just ridiculous, right? It's like trying to raise your blood pressure just so that you can lower it again. Just stay where you are. Like, why would you increase your elasticity just to lower it again? There's no net effect. And if you put Botox in and you reduce cell function, as we can see from things like elasticity being lost, you make it so much harder for Sunekos to work. And if you put Sunekos in first and you increase the function, and then you make your skin, you make it so much harder for your skin to be skin immediately after, what's the point? There's just literally no point whatsoever. And I know this is hard to believe for some of you because you're so obsessed with Botox being anti-aging, and actually it can be pro-aging. Read those papers if you don't believe me. Please, honestly, just read them. You will never think about Botox in the exact same way again. So let me just draw a pen line to separate everything. Let's leave it at that. So let's have a chat about cell, okay? So let's zoom back in, and I've got an error message on the screen. 1 second. There we go. Okay, cellulite it's a huge market. Now, one thing I noticed was that a lot of people had it, but they never spoke to me about it because they didn't realize there's anything they could do. Now, obviously nowadays people are talking about the devices that can use for cellulite and things like that, but the results are pretty terrible in my opinion, right? Once you understand the physiology of cellulite, and I'm going to go through it now, and it is really quite interesting, you will immediately just question anyone that tries to sell you a cellulite device, okay? I know of one particular doctor in Ireland that doesn't use her cellulite devices anymore. She's probably going to sell them soon. All her cellulite cases are treated with this and this alone, because there are things which this can do which are basically impossible with a machine. And you'll see why when I explain it as well. But to start off, you have to understand that, let me write this here. So body 1200 plus slash performer, they treat aging. Okay, Cell treats a physiological condition, a medical condition. And that's the perspective you need to have. So you have to understand, right, what's the dysfunction that is defined as cellulite? Because every condition is a dysfunction of sorts, right? And so you have to understand the dysfunction. When you understand the dysfunction, then you understand why machines don't really get that great a result. Even if there's a great before and after, what's the longevity of that? And have you actually stopped other cellulite from being formed in the same place? Technically, no, you haven't, okay? Whereas with this, you can, and it will make sense why in a second. One of the hallmarks of a cellulite is the acidity of the tissues, right? Now, there are actually different ways to define acidity. I know some people just think, oh, something's acidic, probably tastes a bit sour, but there is more to it if we're being technical, if we're being chemical. Okay, so an acid is something like HCl, hydrogen, and chloride, not chlorine, chloride. Okay, that's hydrochloric acid. We have that in our stomach. We're going to define this particular definition of acid that we're using in this context is the ability to dissociate or ionize in aqueous solution the hydrogen. There are Lewis acids, there are Bronsted-Lowry acids, etc., etc. We're not going to get too complicated. So when you drop it in, essentially you get this. It's positive, so let's use a red for the protons. So H plus, and it breaks into a Cl minus, okay? Let's go back to a brush and let's go to black. Now, we said here that the hydrogen is, for all intents and purposes, for this, it's not technically, but for all intents and purposes, it's a single proton in the middle, which is positive, and a single electron, which is negative, on the outside orbiting, right? So when it dissociates, what happens is that, or when it's dropped into water, is that the electron orbiting hydrogen gets transferred to the chloride, which is why that's now got an extra negative, so it's got an overall negative charge, and the hydrogen is just left with its positive. So a hydrogen ion is the same as a single proton, which is the positive particle in the nucleus of an atom, okay? So you can call it a proton, you can call it a hydrogen ion, genuinely the same thing, okay? The important thing to remember is it's positive, right? So the tissues in cellulite are very acidic. In other words, there's a lot of these hydrogens floating about, just having a great time, causing chaos, right? And you've got to remember that these positive charges affect everything that's going on. I've already said, lysine is quite positive. If you were to inject high-6AA here, because remember it's a cell function optimization product, it wouldn't work because the lysine's positive and there's loads of these. Even though lysine's quite big and very positive, there's so many of these in there in the tissues, they would eventually overpower the lysine. And the lysine, let's say that's told to get lost, that's out of the picture now. And the other 5 are standing around thinking, well, we can't work because there's too many of these hooligans around us. And so you haven't got high-6AA anymore. You just got 5 amino acids in a particular formula. That's just not really going to do much. And so when you have a machine, right, a cellulite machine, you might have like a handpiece that's going over the area. What's it doing here? If you're using radio frequency, it's just putting heat. How is applying heat into a tissue going to change anything here? How's it going to change the acidity of the tissues in there? It's not, okay? Factually speaking, it's not. You might be able to cause some damage to take away the tissue, but it's difficult because of the level of dysfunction in there. You can cause damage with like lasers and the skin takes away the damaged tissue, builds new stuff. But in cellulite, there's so much dysfunction to start with. Even if you cause damage, there's no guarantee that damage will actually be repaired because the workmen that are carrying out those repairs, they're just not up to the task. They've not been fed, they've not been paid, they're under tasks, they're under tooled, they don't have what they need. And so any damage that you cause by using the heat, it's hit or miss whether you get a decent result out of it. And that's just a fact, unfortunately, and device is never really going to get around that problem. And so when you realize this, when you realize the interference with the amino acids, you then have to ask yourself, okay, well, if there's all that, what else is going on in the tissues of cellulite so that I can design a product to cope with that? Well, there's a lot of good papers on cellulite actually. Let's go to let's go with Crew. So Crew 2017 said that there were 3 pillars of the pathophysiology or pathogenesis of cellulite. Okay, the first one is inflammation. The second one is the ECM, the extracellular matrix. Okay, sort of inappropriate ECM content and structure and formula and formulation. The third one is angiogenesis. So what you have here is one thing leading to another, and you actually get this sort of vicious circle because they actually feed into each other quite a lot. So if we take a look at, let's say, what's happening to form the cellulite in the first place, right? It's a bit like stretch marks. There's growth that wasn't expected, and things suffer because it can't keep up with the growth. In cellulite, let's say you have a high-fat feed. Basically, you're having too much KFC. Okay, you have a massive increase in the fats. In other words, in the adipocytes or adipocytes, however you want to say it, the fat cells. Okay. Once you have this, okay, fat cells are useful. The cells carrying out jobs just like a fibroblast or a keratinocyte or a nerve cell or a muscle cell or anything like that. And there's a nucleus in there and there's organelles doing all this stuff. It's not just a blob to keep you warm in winter or to burn fat when you're exercising. There's a lot of useful things going on there. They store vitamin A. That's crucial, as an example. So when you're eating so much and you've got to store that fat, and new adipocytes can be made, they are made, but because it's a cell just like any other cell, it needs energy to carry out its processes, right? And energy can only be provided if it's built into the same network as everything else to receive things like oxygen and or blood flow, shall we say. When you increase your diet or increase, how many KFCs you have so quickly, that there are these rapid expansion zones of adipocytes. Let me just, so that's the next term, you get this expansion of fat size, okay? These new cells, because they're growing so rapidly, they're growing too rapidly for the blood network to actually feed and supply those areas. And so what happens is that you get this hypoxia because there's not enough blood flow going there, so they're starved of oxygen almost. And then when you have that, you've basically got impeded angiogenesis, okay? And look at, this will feed into there, and then when that's happening, things are really starting to struggle. Things are going to inflate. Things are then going to inflame, and when they're inflamed, they can't get what they need. They can't produce the right stuff for the ECM, and then, for God's sake, and then that goes into this, etc., etc., and you get this just constant vicious circle. It just feeds on itself. So then the question is, how do you use high 6AA in an environment like this? How long have I got left to record? We're fine. In an environment like this, knowing that, number one, there's too many of these positive charges to get anywhere, and number two, there's a vicious circle going on. How do you break the vicious circle and go up instead of down? Because the amino acids are going to get screwed in all this electrical environment, shall we say. So what you do is this. You can put the high 6AA in, but you have to put it in with something else. And this is what makes Sunekos cell A, so unique, and B, so incredibly effective in treating cellulite. More effective than devices, I promise you. Okay, you inject the high 6AA as one part, and alongside you have, let me just write this out for you. So you have high 6AA, and then the second part is bicarbonates, okay? So a bicarbonate will be something like HCO3 minus, okay? the carbonate is the end bit there, and then the negative charge is the important bit. That negative charge meets the positive charge of hydrogen, and they then, match on Tinder. They go away. They're obsessed with each other. They bond, and then they're taken out of the area. Okay, sorry about the analogy. They're taken out of the area, and the acidity is now it's on pause for a second while they're being taken out. Then the high 6AA goes in, and it's no longer interfered with. So it's broken that chain because it's taken out one of those links, so it can't self-propagate constantly. So the high 6AA goes in once the acidity has been taken care of and neutralized by the bicarb, and then it can start to optimize the cell function and stop that vicious circle spiraling downwards, and then hopefully reverse and start to go upwards again. And that's the key as to how this works, all right? Now, let me just get this up. Some contraindications for you. Oops. Let's put that there. Again, obvious stuff. Use your common sense. If it's really, really bad cellulite, which I'm going to show you in a sec, that's the only real contraindication. Other than that, obvious things like pregnancy, systemic infections, massive skin infections, blah, blah, blah. Take a picture of it if you want. So here are some grades of cellulite, right? On the left, we have grade 0, and then it goes all the way up to grade 4. Now, here, let's draw it on here. This is rest, this is on pinching, and this is a thermal imaging camera. Now, you get more and more of this sort of orange peel, dimpled appearance, okay? And when you pinch, it's like the opposite of the snapback test. In the snapback test, you're pulling the skin away and seeing how long it takes to spring back. In cellulite, you're pinching and you're seeing how long it takes to return back upwards towards the surface of the skin. And then you're timing it, and you can see, after a certain amount of time, either mostly comes back or it doesn't at all in the case of grade 4. So grade 4 is the important one to look for. In grade 4, you're probably not going to treat it, okay? And that's because you have certain things that are happening, okay? And you can see that in this chart here. Let's move that up. So grade 1 to 4, in terms of the pictures, looks like it's a hard demarcation between them all. But actually it's a spectrum. And you can have a patient that is, say, mostly grade 2. There's a bit that's grade 1, it's not too bad, but then at the other end there might be some that are a bit more advanced, and there's a little patch of grade 3. You're probably always going to have a bit of everything in one patient to some extent, or a range from a certain part of the spectrum on one patient. So look at the stage 1 to 3. There's always something that's overlapping across them all, hence why you're going to see bits of all of them on the same patient probably. Grade 4 though, you have this sclerosis. Now, what is sclerosis? If you're a member of the public and not a medic here, sclerosis is basically just the complete collapse of the vasculature, the blood vessels. Now, as long as there is some blood flow, even if you're in this vicious circle, when the high 6AA starts to break that downward spiral, then it can start to optimize the cell function, because there's something to work with. There's some blood flow at least, so some oxygen is going to come in, some waste products are going to be taken away, some nutrients are going to be brought to the area, and this area of hypoxia, this area of really badly made tissue can slowly be drip fed back to health because there's some blood flow and there's something to work with. And then when it gets better and the ECM remodels, then you can get more blood flow, and then you get this positive upward spiral as opposed to a negative downward spiral. So you it's like slowing down the momentum of a car to then start momentum going in the other direction instead. And that's what you're doing here. When you've got sclerosis though, and the vessels are just shot, I mean, how much can you achieve realistically? Because whatever changes you try and make, nothing is going to sustain. Nothing is even going to work, let alone something produced to be sustained. Because there's no oxygen coming in with the sclerosis. There's no waste product removal. There's no heat even. You know? Look at that thermal imaging camera. There's a reason you get cold patches in cellulite, because you're edging closer and closer towards sclerosis, because the blood supply is going down and down and down as the dysfunction is getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and they go hand in hand and they make it worse and worse and worse. That's why it's a downward spiral of a vicious circle, and you have to break that as early as possible. The earlier your patient seeks treatment, the better off they're going to be. That's why with sclerosis you can't help to grade 4. There might be areas around the 4 which aren't quite as bad, which may be 3. Fine, go with those, but with 4, unfortunately, it's a bit too much for any kind of treatment, really, unless you physically remove tissue. Because whatever change you try and cause, there's no blood supply to try and help everything, hence why things look cold on the thermal imaging camera. Now, in terms of the appearance of the cellulite, I think it's something to know, because once you understand this, you understand the level of dysfunction that we're dealing with here. So let's say, as an example, let's just draw a patch of skin as an example. Let's say we have, that's the top of the skin, and then I'm going to draw the compartments of fat as squares, just for example purposes. Okay, let's extend the skin a little bit further. There we go. Now, inside, I'm going to draw the fat as orange. I'm going to sneeze. Oh, definitely have to cut that one out. So the fat I'm going to draw as this spongy type thing, like that. Now pay attention to the fact that the bag holding the fat is smooth on the outside, even though the thing on the inside is nice and is spongy and almost bobbly and lumpy and all this kind of stuff, okay? That is a really crucial bit to get right here in terms of understanding it. Let's say you have a carrier bag full of things, but the carrier bag itself, the plastic bag, is so thick, okay? Even if you have lots of little things inside, because it's so thick, when you hold it, it's going to look smooth and brown everywhere. Whereas if you have a thin plastic bag, okay, like that, because it's so thin, everything inside is poking out, and you can see this contour and work out what's underneath, okay? Takeaway, Lebanese. So when this compartment is showing skin smooth on top, it means it's a really thick plastic bag, okay? You're not seeing the lumpy fat underneath. This compartment, this green structure that I've drawn, let me just label that. This is fibrillin 3, okay? Fibrillin 3 is what is holding these things in position, okay, without being too technical or complex. And when it's functioning well, this is the appearance, okay? That's compressing everything so the skin is smooth on top. But it has an enemy, okay? In fact, let me just delete where I've drawn this, because that's going to interfere with what I'm doing. Let's draw it over here. So over here, whoops, let's over here put fibrillin 3, and it has an enemy that looks like Pac-Man. Like that. And this is called MMP14, okay? It's an enzyme that breaks, you know, these fibers down, matrix metalloproteinase. We have them in skin everywhere, and there's different types. It can break down things like collagen as well. So MMP14 is an enzyme which eats fibrillin 3, like that diagram suggests. But when it eats fibrillin 3, what's it doing? The plastic bag holding your takeaway in was this thick, and you couldn't tell what was inside, and it's gone really, really thin. And when you squeeze that bag, you can see clearly the shape of everything inside. So what happens is this, it loses its structure, right? So you have the bag looking like this. like that, because it's weakening, and all the fat inside, like that, is pushing outwards, and because the thing it's pushing outward is thinner and weaker, it's starting to show its shape through the fibulin. And what happens there, let's delete this, is that the skin then is poked through as well, because the fibullin's gotten that thin that the fat is then pushing through the skin as well. And that's why you get this appearance on the surface that you can see visually with your eyes. It's essentially the compartment holding the fat weakening, and it's sort of, think of it as like tearing through the dermis. It's weakening the dermis, and it's poking through the skin as a result, and that's what it is. So that's the visual reason we see these changes. And over here, you know, with all this, that's the reason we see all these visual changes in terms of the physiological reasons for the visual changes. And that's why we have this downward spiral, and that's why it's really important to ask about the cellulite and stop it before it has a chance to get much, much worse. But as I said, grade 4, it's not really a huge amount that you can do. I hope all that makes sense. And it's also important to explain that to your patient if they come in and they say, oh, I had this thing for cellulite, it didn't really work. Now you have this understanding, it's very easy to see why certain devices obviously don't work. You know, I wouldn't expect them to work if they don't factor into account this pathophysiology and break that downward spiral. You know that now. You know this downward spiral and how to correct it. Now think to yourself about all these cellulite machines that maybe use radio frequency. Is it any wonder they're not causing as significant changes as we're seeing with Sunekos cell? It shouldn't be, because they're not altering any of this, you know, these 3 pillars of cellulite, this triad that Crew 2017 is talking about. It should be obvious now, devices aren't going to interrupt that. If you put loads of heat in, if anything, you're going to make it a little bit worse, because you're going to increase temperature and make it harder for cells to work, and you're going to increase the inflammation. Yes, heat might cause coagulation that you then take away old tissue from, but you're causing coagulation in order to try and repair that coagulated tissue in an effort to create new tissue. But you're doing that in an area that we've admitted has reduced blood flow. So how good is that ability to remodel going to be when the blood flow is massively reduced in the first place? If you're going to use a device, use this first, because then if you do cause some kind of coagulation, whether it's with a cellular device or something else, maybe even do it on the face, because the tissues are healthier now, they're so much stronger and able to respond to any stimulus that you give them. So this is always a great pre-treatment add-on when you're doing something else as well. But when it comes to cellulite, it's not a pre-treatment add-on, it is the treatment itself, because the device can't compete with the chemical changes that it's causing, which then in turn lead to the massive physiological improvements to break that downward spiral. And that's the key with Sunekos cell. Let me just zoom out for a second. Yes, I have got a little bit of space left. Let me just, whoops, gone too far. Let me come over here. Now, just want to make one final point. Let's draw something over here. High-6AA, you can see now, that's just a collagen thing, right? It's known for that because it does it so well. In fact, it does it better than any other product. But actually, you see in so many different contexts, and it's the same formula works so incredibly well to optimize every cell's function, every function of every cell. And I'm going to tell you some other uses, sister products of Sunekos, okay, using similar principles, okay? I'm running through them. It's also used in things like sarcopenia, immune system defense, wound healing. Is it any wonder it's used in wound healing when we have maximal fibronectin increase, by the way? What else after wound healing? We've also got mucositis, dermatitis, dentistry. So for instance, when we place implants into the maxilla or the mandible, the upper or lower jaw, we want the integration between the metal of the implant and the bone to happen as quickly as possible. We want that healing to happen as quickly as possible. And you can use dental versions of this in that context. When you have a tooth out, there's a big hole in the jaw, and you want the connective tissue to bridge across and to refill that hole with new bone, okay, you can massively speed that up with the dental version of this called Aminogam. It's incredible. Now, it's not exactly the same as Sunekos because, like you've seen with Cell and Body and Performer, depending on where you're using it, you have to deliver it in a particular way for it to be effective. So that's why we have a dental version of it as well. So extractions, implant surgery, things like that, even pain relief. Some patients have reported that they don't get as much pain after teeth coming out with the Aminogam. Gynecology, orthopedics, weight control, sports medicine, even sports supplementation. Let me just delete that 1 sec. Sports medicine by Munich. There were studies done where they looked at the amino acids content in the bloodstream of runners, like Ethiopian runners, before and after a big race, and they saw that the massive drop in the amino acids, and they realized that by preventing that drop, you could actually sustain the performance to a higher intensity and for a longer amount as well. And so we have massive supplement versions. In fact, here's mine. Yeah, if it focuses, there we go. Okay, so there's lots of different uses for this. And when the point I'm trying to make is, look at how different all these uses are, right? You couldn't think of such different contexts, and yet the same universal principle is being played out here in terms of optimizing cell function. If the principle behind this only worked in one specific way instead of everywhere, it wouldn't be as significant. But think how significant it really is when it's used in so many different contexts all the time. Tell me you haven't stumbled upon some universal secret cheat code to nature or to human biology when we look at things like this. I think that's fun. I think that's the biggest thing for me. When it's used in so many different things in the same principle, you have something special, really special. I'm going to zoom out so you can see the entire thing. Let me move this out of the way. Take a picture of that, take a screenshot if you want. Hopefully it will be like a mind map of the entire lecture. You can just glance at a section and remind yourself of what's been spoken of in there. The important thing though is there's very specific ways of injecting this. The reason I haven't gone into that here is because if I just tell you this, it's completely different to having someone there watching you to make sure you do it right. And sometimes if you do it slightly wrong, you may not cause harm, but you're not going to get any result, and you'll think the product is rubbish, or the patient will think you're rubbish, and it's not worth that. Going back to things like CD44 receptors, different types of HA in different types of these Sunekos products, and so you have selected competition for those receptors if you don't inject it right. And if you've got competition, then you're not going to get the effect of both different types of HA. You're only going to get one, which means an entire link is missing in the chain, so the chain is broken. So understand this, watch it a few times if you want to, or if you've already been trained by me and you haven't fallen asleep, maybe watch it again to refresh your memory. But pay attention to the way you inject after learning all of this. I live in the UK, I teach all over the UK. You're welcome to get in touch if you want to arrange some training. I'm a global key opinion leader for this, like I said. Training in different countries as well for professional dietetics. If you're in Germany, please get me there. Ich liebe Deutsch und Deutschland. We've done things in French, Spanish, Italian, all these different places. My French, Spanish, Italian, Telugu, Portuguese, they're not as good as my English, obviously, and German as well. But we do it in these different languages as well. So please get in touch. I hope you enjoyed that. If you've got any questions at all about something in the theory or cases or anything like that, my Instagram is in the description below. Or if you want to arrange something, please get in touch. Thank you very much.